War for Crowns. Bloodraven 2599. Summary. A new reimagining of the War of the Five Kings with certain aspects of the world moved around for a new and exciting story. The cultures and histories of the Seven Kingdoms have been tweaked, creating a new chain of events with ramifications that echo in this new war. Notes. Warning. This fanfic is on indefinite hiatus and will remain incomplete for the foreseeable future. Chapter 1, Preparations of War. Chapter Text. Robb stood at the window of his chamber in the Gatehouse Tower, if the room he was in could be called a chamber. Dark and dingy, with moss-covered cobbled dark stone walls, riddled with cracks and holes, and a small hearth that crackled with burning wood on the wall adjacent from the bed of the chamber. The Gatehouse Tower was the largest of the three remaining structures of Moat Cailin, the once great stronghold of the first men that guarded their southern border, now a collection of three ruined towers. As Robb stood by the window and gazed out, he felt sheer discomfort, like a gnawing sickness in his stomach, not from the chamber itself but from the view outside. From the window, Robb could view the extensive grassland on the swamp's edge that Moat Cailin bordered, and spread out across the grassland was a sea of tents, soldiers, horses and banners. 18,000 men all gathered together at Robb's call, all of them under his command, prepared to follow him into war. Robb recalled when he first told Maester Luwin to call the banners. He was in the great hall with his uncle Benjen, Jon and Theon. Theon asked him if he was afraid, and Robb with trembling hands replied that he was, to which Theon assured him it was a good thing because it meant he wasn't stupid, and Robb hoped to the gods that he was right. A sharp knock on the door came, drawing Robb's attention. "Enter," Robb commanded, trying to sound as confident and manly as he could. The door opened with a creaking sound and in came Robb's brother, or half-brother, Jon. Jon and Robb were the same age, neither of them was quite sure who was older, something their father had never clarified for them. Of the two, Jon looked closer to their father than Robb did. Jon had the long face of the Starks, with dark, brown hair and grey eyes so dark they almost seemed black, while Robb took after his mother, with a stocky build, blue eyes and thick red-brown hair. Both had grown small and thin wispy beards which their uncle Benjen called their baby pelts, but the two felt that it made them look more manly and serious. "The lords are gathered in the hall, they are waiting for you," Jon explained. Robb nodded and went to his bed, pulling his leather sword belt off of one of the bedposts and buckling it around his waist over his armor. Robb still felt ill-fitted for his armor, a boy of 15 years clad in a dark brown boiled leather cuirass woven with nets of ringmail, lobstered pauldrons, cutters, gauntlets, polins and greaves all fashioned from steel, studded leather splint-reary braces and cuisses, and a long heavy dark cloak lined with fur pelts hanging off his shoulders. Jon wore the same style suit of armor as his brother, though the leather of his cuirass and studded split armor was black and the steel of his armor was of a darker color, and his fur-lined cloak was black as well, like the attire of the Night's Watch. Jon had always been fascinated with the Night's Watch of legend, but the Brotherhood was disbanded after King Brandon the Unifier brought the giants and the wildlings beyond the wall under his yoke, and the wall became nothing more than a landmark of ancient times, and all its gates were opened and travel north and south was free to all the people of the north. The North Spannermen beyond the wall were still rallying a force to send south to aid them, a force Robb felt he'd desperately need, for most of the giants and skin changers lived beyond the wall, with no more than 200 skin changers in their current army and only 8 giants. Robb and his brother Jon were skin changers themselves, wargs who could put themselves in the minds of their direwolves, Grey Wind and Ghost. After fixing his sword belt around his waist, Robb nodded to his brother and let Jon lead as the two went down to the meeting in the hall of the tower. The lords of the north were gathered in a drafty hall with a peat fire smoking in a black hearth. The lords were all gathered around a massive table of carved stone that filled the hall. Most of the lords were seated while their siblings and children that had accompanied them to war stood around them, and the leader of the giants who had joined their host had to crawl through the double doors into the hall on his hands and knees and sit in the corner of the room. The giant's name was Dongo Gigrond, but all called him Dongo. He was not a Magna, simply a respected warrior and an old friend of the great Jon, who was visiting Last Hearth with his companions when the banners were called by Robb and went south to fight for the Starks. Robb couldn't have been much older than 9 when he first met a giant, the great giant chieftain, Mag March Tundowig, better known as Mag the Mighty. He and his host of giants visited Winterfell and had a great feast in the courtyard of the castle. Mag's ancestors were kings of the giants, an ancient bloodline that stretched back before the first men and swore themselves to Brandon the Unifier thousands of years ago, but Robb, Theon and John just remembered him as the great big giant who playfully tried to pick them up as they ran around and between his legs while giggling. With any luck, Mag would be on his way to the Night Fort to rally with Thans, Hornfoots, Night Runners, men of the Frozen Shore, Ice River clans and cave dwellers to form a second host to reinforce Robb's army, but they were far from Moat Cailin and Robb needed to concern himself with the men he had and where he was. At the head of the table where his lords were gathered, was an empty seat with a pile of maps and papers laid out before it, a seat set for Robb. To the right was a seat occupied by Robb's uncle, Benjen, a thin and long man, gaunt with sharp features and blue-grey eyes and clad in the armor of House Stark. Seated along either side of the table were Roose Bolton, the great Jon Umber, Ricard Karstark, the old Bear Mormont and his spear-wife sister Mage the She-Bear, Galbert and Robert Glover and many others. Robb and Jon's direwolves, Grey Wind and Ghost sat laying out at the foot of Robb's chair and lean, black-haired Theon Greyjoy stood behind Robb's seat, holding the hilt of his sword as though he were Robb's bodyguard. Seated between Lord Howland Reed and Lord Harley's Hornwood was Leaf, a shaman of the Children of the Forest. She had nut-brown skin dappled like a deer's with paler spots, and large ears. Large liquid gold and green eyes which were slit like a cat's. Her hair was a tangle of brown, red and gold, autumn colors, with vines and twigs and withered flowers woven through it, and she wore a cloak of leaves. Leaf was a shaman of the Wolfswood and high priestess of the faith of the old gods. Robb brought her to Moat Cailin to perform rituals and make offerings to the gods before they went to war, and the council of the Children of the Forest was sacred in the north, especially in harsh times. While the lords of the north rose at Robb's approach, Robb bowed his head in respect as he caught Leaf's eyes, and she nodded her head in the same courtesy. "My lords, now that we are gathered, let us begin. There is much work to do," Robb explained as he approached the council and took his seat. "Lord Howland, your seat of Greywater Watch is the most southern positioned stronghold of the north. I understand your skin changers have been scouting the situation in the Riverlands, yes?" Robb asked, turning to Lord Howland. "Yes, Lord Robb. My skin changers have sent their birds and beasts south and listened for word in the Riverlands, and the information is quite dire. The Lannisters have launched a ruthless invasion into your Grand's lands. The Kingslayer routed the forces of House Vance and House Piper at the Golden Tooth, and that overgrown beast, the Mountain, slew the force your Lord Father sent to apprehend him before his imprisonment," Lord Howland explained. Murmurs and hushed talks began to arise from the gathered nobles. Furthermore, Lord Howland said sternly, reclaiming the attention of the gathered nobles, "We also have word that after his victory at the Golden Tooth, Jaime Lannister advanced to meet the massed power of House Tully outside the walls of Riverrun. Your uncle, Sir Edmure Tully, and many others were captured, and the castle is currently under siege." Robb leaned forward on the table, thrown by the new information. Robb knew his quest was southward to rescue his father and sisters from Lannister captivity, but now his uncle was a hostage of the Kingslayer and his grandfather was under siege. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down upon Robb's shoulders. His two youngest brothers were at Winterfell while Robb marched further south to war with his uncle and the only other brother he had by his side. The Riverlords are falling back. With Jaime Lannister engaged at Riverrun and a second Lannister army following him from the south with even larger numbers, we need to pick our next move carefully or we could get overwhelmed, my lords, the stern grey-bearded Lord Karstark cautioned. "One army or two, the kings in the north threw back hosts 10 times as large," Great Jon snorted, dismissively. "If every war ended the same way, then all wars would have ended long ago. Tywin Lannister is a tactical and vicious bastard without honor or even a modicum of restraint in his brutality. You want proof of my words? Look no further than the Reynes, the Tarbecks and the Targaryens. We can expect nothing but the most horrific manners of warfare from him," Galbart Glover declared. Many of the lords murmured in agreement with Galbart Glover and smacked their hands on the stone table, approving of his words, for many of them had fought with Robb's father in the last war and were forced to march through the streets of corpses from the Lannisters' sack of King's Landing. Hours passed into the early evening as the nobles gathered in the hall and deliberated over plans for the campaign south. Some of the nobles had gotten out of their seats and crowded around Robb. The Great Jon and Roose Bolton stood over him pointing to points of interest on the map before Robb. The doors of the hall creaked open at one point, though Robb thought little of it, thinking it to be servers bringing fresh wine jugs to fill their cups and a barrel for the giant Dongo. As Robb continued to deliberate, the lords further back in the hall fell silent as whoever had entered the chamber drew nearer. When the room fell silent, Robb looked up at the sudden quiet and caught a sight he did not expect at Moat Cailin. "Mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion, a mixture of surprise, joy, confusion and worry swirling in his throat. Lady Caitlin of Winterfell, a beautiful woman with fair skin, high cheekbones, long auburn hair and blue eyes, dressed in a dark blue gown, leather riding gloves and a hooded fur-lined dark blue cloak. She was flanked by several knights, one that stood past her shoulder, a tall and lean man, clean-shaven and his face craggy and wind-burnt, his features lined and weathered, grey neck-length hair parted in the middle and laughing eyes of deep blue beneath bushy eyebrows. He dressed in a suit of grey plate armor and a cloak of red and blue ripples fastened by a shiny black fish, wrought in gold and obsidian, pinned its folds against his shoulder. Another knight who carried a helm at his breast was dressed in full plate armor with 5 arrows stacked over each other in different directions like a star engraved on the gorget and a chainmail coif. The last one was one Robb recognized, Sir Wendell Marndaly, a very wide and heavy man, bald with a bushy walrus moustache that covered his mouth. He dressed in steel plate and scale mail with a pale blue cloak lined with turquoise-dyed fur. Lady Caitlin stood silently looking at Robb, her eyes full of emotion and her mouth half open as though she were struggling to find words. Grey Wind got to his feet and padded across the room to where she stood while Ghost, seeming to emulate the shyness of his master in Lady Caitlin's presence, stood and hung his head. "You've grown a beard," Lady Caitlin said to her son with a gentle smile as Grey Wind sniffed her hand. Robb's eyebrows went up, for of all the things he thought his mother would say, comments on his beard were not one of them. Robb looked over to Jon and the two smirked at one another's small wispy beards, recalling their uncle's comments about their facial hair being no more than baby pelts. Robb rubbed his stubbled jaw as he turned back to his mother, suddenly awkward as he noticed the lords all gathered staring at him. "Yes," Robb confirmed, running his hand over his jaw. "I like it," Caitlin said with a smile as she stroked Grey Wind's head gently. "It makes you look like my brother, Ed Muir." Robb's heart skipped a beat, his mind recalling how Ed Muir was now a prisoner of the Kingslayer. Grey Wind licked at Caitlin's fingers playfully and trotted back to his place next to Ghost. Sir Helman Tallheart, one of the few Northmen to bear the title of knight, followed Grey Wind's lead, walking to Caitlin and paying his respects, perhaps to save Robb from having to give such dire news so quickly after his mother's arrival. Sir Helman dropped to a knee and pressed his brow to her hand. "Lady Caitlin," he said, "you are fair as ever, a welcome sight in troubled times." The Glovers followed, Galbart and Robert and Great Yonumber and the rest one by one. Dongo did not get up, but introduced himself in the old tongue and spoke words of flattery to Lady Caitlin that all the Northerners could understand. When Lady Caitlin's knight in full plate armor noticed the giant, he tried to grip the hilt of his sword, but the Northmen gripped their own weapons, silently informing the knight if he drew steel against the giant he'd be the first to die. When Leif came before Caitlin, it was the Lady of Winterfell who curtsied and the Child of the Forest took the lady's hand and welcomed her in the old tongue with Caitlin replying with thanks in the same language, but her pronunciation of the old tongue was broken and with a strange accent, but her effort was much appreciated by the Northerners. Jon and Theon were the last two to pay tribute to Lady Caitlin, seeming to try and outlast one another, for the Lady of Winterfell was fond of neither of them. When the time came for one of them to step forward, Theon went first, kneeling and taking the lady's hand. "I had not looked to see you here, my lady," he said as he knelt. "I had not thought to be here," Caitlin replied, "until I came ashore at White Harbour and Lord Wyman had told me that Robb had called the banners. You know his son, Sir Wendell." Wendell Marndaly stepped forward and bowed as low as his girth would allow. It seemed Lady Caitlin had ushered the conversation forward, perhaps to avoid having Jon approach her to pay respect. "And my uncle Sir Brynden Tully," Caitlin introduced to the grey-haired man with a black trout brooch. "The Blackfish," Robb said. "Forgive me, I thought you were in service to my Aunt Lysa," said Robb, recalling Sir Brynden having been named Knight of the Gate by Jon Arryn after Robert's rebellion. That I was my boy. But at my own request, your Aunt Lysa gave me leave to join Sir Eustace here with a small contingent to vanguard the Vale's war effort," the Blackfish explained, gesturing to the knight in full plate that stood across from him. The knight bowed before Robb, his armor shuffling and clinking with each brisk movement. "Sir Eustace Hunter, my lord. I come to you at the command of your aunt, the illustrious Lysa Arryn, Lady Regent of the Vale, with a force of 50 volunteer mounted knights and furthermore a pledge from your lady aunt to raise a host of men who will join you in the Riverlands once the necessary levies have been rallied to avenge the murder of our Lord Jon Arryn. The Southron knight spoke in a boisterous and flamboyant tone, but his message was welcome news. "Thank you for joining us, sirs, we need men of your courage. Is Sir Roderick with you as well, mother? I've missed him." "Sir Roderick is on his way north from White Harbour. I have named him Castellan and commanded him to hold Winterfell until our return." "Maester Lewin is a wise counsellor but unskilled in the arts of war," Catelyn explained. "Have no fear on that count," Lady Stark the Great told her at his base rumble. "Winterfell is safe. We'll shove our swords up Tywin Lannister's bunghole soon enough, begging your pardons, and then it's on to the Red Keep to free Ned." A few cheers and laughs went around the table at the Great words. "My lady, a question as it please you." Roose Bolton, Lord of the Dread Fort, had a small voice, yet when he spoke larger men quieted to listen. His eyes were curiously pale, almost without color, and his look was disturbing. "It is said that you hold Lord Tywin's dwarf son as a captive. Have you brought him to us? I vow we should make good use of such a hostage." Catelyn took a deep breath through her nose. "I did hold Tyrion Lannister, but no longer," Catelyn declared. A chorus of consternation greeted the news. "I was no more pleased than you, my lords. The gods saw fit to free him, with some help from a dishonorable cutthroat who stood as his champion in a trial by combat. And a good knight lies dead while the stunted murderer of Lord Arryn walks free," Sir Eustace grunted bitterly. The lords were anxious to question the Lady of Winterfell further, but Catelyn raised a hand. "No doubt we will have time for all this later, but my journey has fatigued me. I would speak with my son alone. I know you will forgive me, my lords." She gave them no choice. After a moment of awkward silence, the Great spoke up. "Are you all deaf? Move your asses," he roared like a commander to his soldiers. "You first, Dongo. Get your hairy ass out." Great yelled in the old tongue to the giant sitting in the corner of the room. Dongo grunted and got down on his hands and knees and crawled through the open doors of the hall and was followed out by the Northern Lords, led by the ever-obliging Lord Hornwood. Robb looked over to Jon, welcoming him to stay if he wished, but Jon shook his head, knowing full well Lady Catelyn wished him gone more than anyone, and summoned Ghost to his side and Benjen following behind Jon. "Come on, that means us too," Greyjoy Jon stated, patting Theon's shoulder as he lingered near Robb. Theon smiled and followed Jon, Benjen and Ghost out, with Benjen closing the doors behind him after all others had left. Catelyn was silent at first, moving over to the table and taking the seat previously occupied by Galbart Glover. She filled Galbart Glover's horn-sipped and studied Robb, who was still standing, unsure of what to do or say. "Edmure was 16 when he grew his first whiskers," she stated, looking again at his chin. "I'll be 16 soon enough," Robb said, tired of his mother's critiquing of his maturity. "And you're 15 now. 15 and leading a host to the battle. Can you understand why I might fear, Robb?" his mother asked. Robb composed himself and looked sternly at his mother. Robb would question himself on his readiness in his own mind, but he would not be made a boy again because his mother wished for him to be so, not when his father and sisters were in need of him. "There was no one else," Robb declared. "No one," she said. "Pray, who were those men I saw here a moment ago?" "Roose Bolton. Ricard Karstark. Gia Mormont. Galbart and Robert Glover. The Great Hellman Tallheart. You might have given the command to any of them. Gods be good, you might have even sent Theon, though he would not be my choice." "They're not Starks," Robb stated sternly, reminding his mother of who he was. "And what of your uncle Benjen? Not only a Stark, but better yet a man, a grown man and an experienced fighter who has spent his life battling bandits, outlaws, poachers and criminals in your father's name. Why, rather than see him commanding this army, did I see him and others like him tending to the command of a boy? They are men, Robb, seasoned in battle. You were fighting with wooden swords only a year past." Robb grew angry with his mother's dismissal of him, but would not tantrum like a child and prove her point, and so fought hard to keep his composure. "My father named me Lord of Winterfell in his absence. He trusted me with the safety and prosperity of the North. That responsibility is not for me to pile on to my uncle or Jon or Theon or any of those men when the weight strains on me. This is my duty, my responsibility, and my family. I will not take up songs as needlework while my uncle, my brother and my best friend march to war with the North's banners to save my father and sisters from Joffrey," Robb declared sternly. Lady Catelyn opened her mouth as though to respond to Robb, but she relented and looked away. I know, she uttered softly, abashed. Even if I could sway you from this path, I would not. Whether I like it or not, you've come too far. Someday, these lords will look to you as their liege. If I had the power to pack you off now, like a child being sent to bed without his supper, they will remember and laugh about it in their cups. The day will come when they need them to respect you, even fear you a little. Laughter is poison to fear, and I will not do that to you, much as I might wish to keep you safe. Rob let out a deep sigh, now assured his mother would not be an obstacle in his road to war. You have my thanks, Mother, Rob said softly, his relief obvious beneath the formality. She reached across the table and touched Rob's hair. You are my firstborn, Rob. I have only to look at you and remember the day you came into this world, red-faced and squalling. Rob hesitated at her touch and rose, feeling embarrassed and belittled as a child once again. After standing, Rob walked to the hearth where Greywind rubbed his head against his leg. You know, about father? Rob inquired, realizing only then that he had blurted out about rescuing his father and sisters without asking how much his mother already knew. Yes, she replied. Lord Marndaly told me when I arrived at White Harbour. I had hoped to rally some of your father's banners with Benjen to help Lysa's Vale Knights drive the Lannisters out of our homeland. Imagine my surprise to find all the castles from the Neck to the Wall were already marching south to war without me, Caitlin explained, bringing a smirk to Rob's face. Have you had any word of your sisters? Caitlin asked. There was a letter, Rob said, scratching Greywind under the jaw. One for you as well, but it came to Winterfell with mine, Rob said, going to the table and rummaging amongst some maps and papers. And handed Caitlin a crumpled parchment. This is the one she wrote me. I never thought to bring yours, Rob stated, handing the parchment to his mother. Caitlin seemed concerned and turned her eyes to the parchment. The first time Rob read the parchment was in the Great Hall when Maester Stillowin handed it to him. Jon, Theon and Benjen were all present. Rob couldn't believe his sister would write such a thing, but Maester Stillowin assured him it was the Queen's words in truth, only written in Sansa's hand by force. Rob had read the letter 1,000 times since then, since leaving Winterfell. Rob could tell which parts of the letter his mother was up to as a series of expressions of disbelief, anger, disgusts and fear came and went across her face. This is Cersei's letter, not your sister's, Caitlin declared sternly, clearly drawing the same conclusion as Maester Stillowin. There is no mention of Arya, Caitlin said with a disheartened expression. Rob shook his head. None. We believe, or rather we hope, that they have her and simply haven't told Sansa, or that she might have escaped somehow. Rob wasn't sure he believed it himself, but he felt he had to. The real message is in what she does not say. All this is about how kindly and gently they are treating her. I know the sound of a threat, even whispered. They have your sister, maybe both of them, and mean to keep them. Rob cleared his throat. I had hoped, that if you still had the imp, a trade of hostages. Rob did not mean to pry on his mother's dealings with Tyrion Lannister, for she seemed quite dismayed about no longer having him as a prisoner when questioned earlier, but Rob felt he needed to make his mind known. So, the knight you brought with you, sir? Eustace, Caitlin added. Right. Sir Eustace and his knights were sent from the Eyrie, and he claimed a second larger host was being prepared in the Vale, Rob recounted. I sent a raven asking Aunt Lysa for help, but from Sir Eustace's remarks it seems she's already beaten me to it. Caitlin smiled, confirming Rob's suspicions. The 50 knights Sir Eustace and my uncle brought with them were the volunteers at hand at the Eyrie when my sister first called her own banners. They wish to be the first of the Valymen to wet their swords with Lannister blood in the Riverlands. She won't send the full host of the Vale, for she is very worried about protecting her son and fears with the Crown lands south of her, they could be attacked at any time. But she is preparing an army of reasonable size to help break the Lannister incursion into the Riverlands. A grim thought crossed Rob's mind as he recalled the Riverlands and realized there was some long overdue information that Lady Caitlin needed to hear. Mother, there is something I need to tell you, Rob explained in a serious tone. Jaime Lannister led a force to Riverrun where grandfather was rallying an army. Uncle Ed Muir was captured and Riverrun is under siege, Rob explained, his voice breaking at the end as he relayed the information to his mother. Rob's mother looked at him, her face stalled, but then she turned away and a shaky breath escaped her. Mother. They have father, they have Sansa, they have Arya, they have Uncle Ed Muir, they are attacking grandfather as we speak, They tried to kill Bran twice and they murdered Jon Arryn. If I go to war, so many lives hang in the balance, one wrong move. I don't know what to do, Robb declared. Catelyn looked at her eldest son, her eyes red, she sniffled and breathed deeply. You must fight, she said sternly, you have no other choice. If you go to King's Landing and swear fealty, you will never be allowed to leave. Our best hope, our only hope is if you can defeat them in the field. If you should chance to take Lord Tywine or the Kingslayer captive, then a trade might very well be possible. But that is not the heart of it. So long as you have power enough that they should fear you, Ned and your sisters shall be safe. Cersei is wise enough to know she will need them to make the peace, should the fighting go against her. Robb thought on his mother's words for a moment, drumming his fingers on the great stone table. And if the fighting doesn't go against her? Robb asked, what if it goes against us? Catelyn reached out and shook his hand. Robb, I will not soften the truth for you. If you lose, there is no hope for any of us. They say there is naught but stone at the heart of Casterly Rock. Remember the fate of Rhaegar's children, their mangled and crushed corpses lain out wrapped in Lannister cloaks so Tywine could curry favor with Robert. Remember the reigns of Castamere, when they hid in their mines beneath their castle and offered terms of surrender. Tywine rejected them and instead plugged every entrance to the mines and then had his men dam a nearby stream and divert it to the nearest mine entrance. Water easily found its way through the tiny gaps in the rubble that blocked the mouth of the entrance. 300 men, women and children, their screams said to have been heard by the men stationed outside the entrances to the mines. Robb shuddered to think of such a brutal and cruel form of mass murder. All of that just to send a message to his other bannermen not to stand against him. Tywine Lannister is an opportunist and a monster and the years have not made him kinder, Lady Catelyn explained. After a brief pause, Lady Catelyn wiped her eyes and cleared her throat. Tell me what you know of the fighting in the Riverlands, she said. Less than a fortnight past they fought a battle in the hills below the Golden Tooth, Robb said, recounting all the information he'd discussed with his council earlier. Uncle Edmure had sent Lord Vance and Lord Piper to hold the pass, but the Kingslayer descended upon them and put them to flight. Lord Vance was slain. Last word we had by the time we arrived here at Moat Cailin was that Lord Piper was falling back to join your brother and his other bannermen at Riverrun with Jaime Lannister on his heels, but Howland Reed had his skin changers travel south with their birds and beasts scouting the Riverlands. That's when we got word of your brother's capture and the Kingslayer's siege at Riverrun, Robb explained. A shaky breath escaped Lady Catelyn. That's not the worst of it, though. All the time they were battling in the pass, Lord Tywine was bringing a second Lannister army around from the south. It's said to be even larger than Jaime's host. Father must have known that, because he sent out some men to oppose them under the king's own banner. He gave the command to some Southron lord named Lord Derrick or something like that, but Sir Raymond Arry rode with them and the letter said there were other knights as well and a force of father's own guardsmen. Only it was a trap. Lord Derrick had no sooner crossed the Red Fork than the Lannisters fell upon him. The king's banner be damned, and Gregor Clegane took them in the rear as they tried to pull back across the Mummer's Ford. This Lord Derrick and a few others may have escaped, no one is certain, but Sir Raymond was killed and most of our men from Winterfell. Lord Tywine has closed off the King's Road, it's said, and now he's marching north toward Harrenhal, burning as he goes. Catelyn's breathing became deeper, presumably trying to quell the fast beating of her heart. You mean to meet him here? She asked. If he comes so far, but no one thinks he will, Robb said. Lord Howland has mobilized the Crannog men down in Greywater Watch. If the Lannisters come up the neck, the Crannog men will bleed them every step of the way. But Galbart Glover says Lord Tywine is too smart for that, and Roose Bolton agrees. He'll stay close to the Trident, they believe, taking the castles of the Riverlords one by one until Riverrun stands alone. We need to march south to meet him. Catelyn's expression conveyed hesitance and she was slow to respond. Is that wise? You're strongly placed here. It's said that the old kings in the north could stand at Moat Cailin and throw back great hosts 10 times the size of their own, her words almost perfectly mirroring the ones said by the great Jon earlier. Yes, but our food and supplies are running low and this is not land we can live off easily. We've been waiting for Lord Marndaly, but now that his sons have joined us, we need to march, Robb declared sternly. How many men do you have? Lady Catelyn asked. 18,000, not counting the forces you arrived with. 8 giants, 200 skin changers. Mance Rayder is summoning a second host from beyond the wall. They'll gather at the night fort and march south, but it will take time to rally them and even longer to reach Moat Cailin, Robb explained. To summon an army from all across the lands of the north beyond the wall and march them over 1,000 leagues south to King's Landing would seem too steep a demand from any other liege lord, but not in the north. Northerners were different from their southern neighbors. They were a warrior people, whose ancestors stood against the armies of the undead in the long night. None of the 7 kingdoms had a standing army like the free cities, but Northerners were born warriors. Every highborn and lowborn knew how to wield sword, axe, and pike. It was who they were. Their history, their culture and honor was everything to the Northerners. Robb had no doubt in his mind that the army from beyond the wall would march as far south as they had to and fight no more than a single battle before being sent home and be content that they kept to their oaths of fealty, for that was the northern way. Southern armies, on the other hand, may have had fancy armored knights, crossbows and pretty banners, but their hosts were summoned up from farmers, fishermen and common folk of all kinds who'd never held pikes in their lives other than a few basic weeks of training. But in the north, it was the rite of passage for every son and daughter to learn the axe and sword, which made every conscript from the north worth 7 from the south. Marching is all well, Lady Caitlin said to her son, but where? And to what purpose? What do you mean to do? Robb paused for a moment and hesitated to speak, for he had not yet chosen a course of action and was still deliberating with his council when his mother arrived. The Great Jon thinks we should take the battle to Lord Tywine and surprise him, he said, but the Glovers and the Carstarks feel that we'd be wiser to go around his army and break the siege at Riverrun, or perhaps recruit a force from Aunt Lysa in the Vale. Robb ran his fingers through his shaggy mane of auburn hair, puzzled about which act to take. If he joined the host at the Vale, he would be procrastinating in his attack and leave more Riverlords vulnerable to the Lannisters' incursion. If he joined the fighting in the Riverlands with haste and was routed, the entire northern offense would rout with him. The Riverlords would continue to fall and the Valymen would have no allies to assist them when they joined the battle. Though by the time we reach Riverrun, I'm not certain. Be certain, Caitlin commanded. Or go home and take up that wooden sword again, or your sister's needlework. You cannot afford to be seen as indecisive in front of men like Roose Bolton and Rickard Karstark. The Northerners are loyal to your father and to you and will die to save him and your sisters, but will not follow your commands and will try to undermine you if they cannot trust your competency. Make no mistake, Robb, these are your bannermen first, not your friends. You named yourself battle commander, so command. Robb was stunned, having never heard such harsh words from his mother, but he was not angry, for as sharp as her words were, they were true. As you say, Mother, Robb said confidently but sternly with a nod. Now I'll ask you again, what do you mean to do? She asked. Robb drew a map across the table, a ragged old piece of leather covered with lines of faded print, one end curled up from being rolled. He weighed it down with his dagger. Both plans have virtues, but, look, if we try to swing around Lord Tywine's host, if we take the risk of being caught between him and the Kingslayer, and if we attack him, by all reports he has more men than I do and a lot more armored horse. The Great Jon says that won't matter if we catch him with his breeches down, but it seems to me that a man who has fought as many battles as Tywine Lannister won't be so easily surprised, Robb explained. Good, Caitlin said, approving of her son's assumptions. Tell me more, she encouraged. I'd leave a small force here to hold Moat Cailin until Mance's host arrives, archers mostly, and march the rest down the causeway. But once we're below the neck, I'd split our host in two. The foot can continue down the King's Road while our horsemen can cross the Green Fork at the Twins, Robb explained, pointing at the map. When Lord Tywine gets word that we've come south, he'll march north to engage our main host, leaving our riders free to hurry down to the west bank of Riverrun and break the siege. Robb sat back feeling proud of himself but held back his desire to smile, not wishing to seem arrogant in front of his mother. Robb had expected, or perhaps hoped, to hear praise from his mother, but instead, she silently looked down at the map and frowned, causing Robb's heart to flutter as his eyes darted back to the map, frantically trying to find some mistake he might have missed. You'd put a river between the two parts of your army. And between Jaime and Lord Tywine, he said eagerly, trying to get his mother to see things as he did. Without thinking, Robb finally allowed himself to smile, showing the pride he had for his plan. There's no crossing on the Green Fork above the Ruby Ford, where Robert won his crown, not until the Twins all the way up here, and Lord Free controls that bridge. He's your father's bannerman, isn't that so? Caitlin's eyes seemed to roll with a slight expression of disgust. he is, she admitted, but my father has never trusted him, nor should you. I won't, Rob promised, though partially just to reassure his mother of his plan. What do you think? He asked, hoping once again to hear praise from his mother. Which force would you command? The horse, Rob answered at once, already having decided it when he first drummed up his plan. And the other? Caitlin asked. The Great Jon is always saying we should smash Lord Tywine. I thought I'd give him the honor, Rob admitted, recalling how eager a warrior the Great Jon was. Also it would be presumed Dongo and his giants would go with the Great Jon, and while Tywine's men might have had more armored horses and mounted knights, no Southron warrior had faced a northern giant in the field since before the conquest. Your father once told me that the Great Jon was as fearless as any man he'd ever known, Caitlin stated, causing Rob to grin, thinking she was agreeing with him. Grey winked at two of his fingers and he laughed about it. So you agree then? Your father is not fearless, Caitlin pointed out, he is brave, but that is very different. Rob took a moment and pondered his mother's words, recalling once when he was small asking his father how a man could be brave if he were afraid. His father looked at him and said that is the only time a man can be brave. The Northerners were a warrior people, true enough. Some would say dying was what they lived for. To die in battle for a good cause was considered the greatest honor among their kind. To prove yourself in battle in the eyes of Skarn the god of war, Kala god of honor, and Afulda the chieftain of the gods. If Rob sent the Great Jon into battle at the head of the host, they'd scream at the sky and call the gods to witness them and rush headfirst to their deaths, fighting down to tooth and claw to take as many Lannisters as they could, probably take at least half of Tywine's host, but not a single Northerner would be left standing, for none would turn and run even to save their own lives. The eastern host will be all that stands between Lord Tywine and Winterfell, Rob said thoughtfully. Well, them and whatever few bowmen I leave here at the moat, so I don't want someone fearless, do I? No, you want cold and cunning, I should think, not courage. Rob instantly realized who his mother was speaking of. Roose Bolton, he said at once, that man scares me. Then let us pray he will scare Tywine Lannister as well. Rob nodded and rolled up the map. I'll give the commands and assemble an escort to take you home to Winterfell, Rob declared, but his mother's expression changed. Despair and fear began to emit from her like the smoke of a hearth. I am not going to Winterfell, she declared as tears began to stream down her face. My father may be dying behind the walls of Riverrun, my brother is in a Lannister cage, I must go to them. Rob wanted to argue, to send her back to Bran and Rickon and know she was safe, but he would not, no more than she would send him back. Her brief counsel might have just saved the foot host from Rob's blunder. He needed her, and so she would stay. With that, the evening drew ever darker, and so after getting the Blackfish and his mother beds in the gatehouse tower, Rob went to bed, knowing that the next day they would prepare for war. Chapter 2, Battle Cries of the North. Chapter text. Their last full day at Moat Cailin came and went fairly fast in Jon's eyes. Rob held another war council in the gatehouse hall in the morning, picking up where they left off and explaining his plan. After passing the twins, they'd split off into two hosts, one of horses to break the Kingslayer's siege of Riverrun and one of footmen to challenge Tywine Lannister in the field. A few lords objected and launched their concerns, for it was not what they had discussed the previous night before Lady Catelyn arrived and sent them all from the hall, but Benjen reminded them of their place and they all fell in line soon enough. The lords of the north were silent but clearly troubled when Rob named Roose Bolton commander of the footmen. Worse yet were the expressions of disdain from those who had been chosen to serve under him, Lord Mejas Owen, Harlys Hornwood, Harry Oncastark, Sir Donal Locke and Sir Willis Marndaly among others. Dongo agreed to march with Roose Bolton along with 5 giants, and the last 2 who were better runners would keep up with Rob's mounted host. Before the war council was dissolved, Rob declared that they would make the offerings and host the rituals that night and ride out the next morning. An old northern tradition where Rob, the battle commander, would make a speech about why they were fighting and what for, and call upon the old gods to bear witness to them on the field and guide them in battle, and Leif, the shaman, would make a sacrifice as an offering to the gods. Jon spent most of the day fidgeting nervously, checking his saddle, checking his sword, his armor, terrified he'd mess something up and get himself or someone else killed. War was so much easier when it was a game he played with Rob and Theon in the courtyard of Winterfell. As the early evening fell, a short while before the ceremony would begin, Jon was in his room, fully armored, cloaked and examining the edge of his sword while Ghost lounged in front of the flaming hearth of his room. Jon recalled when Sir Roderick first bestowed steel swords on him, Theon and Rob, cautioning them that they were men's tools, not children's toys, words that John took to heart. A sharp knock at the door came, prompting John to place the blade down on his bed and summon his visitor, most likely a guard, to inform him the ceremony was about to begin. "Come," John called out, but it was not a guard who entered, but Lady Caitlin. John was perplexed to see Lady Caitlin in his chamber, for she was a woman who had always wanted nothing to do with him, having hated him for as long as he could remember. The last time John saw Caitlin was on the day he left Winterfell. Tyrion Lannister, Lord Tywin's son, wished to visit the Wall and John escorted him. The Wall had not been home to the Night's Watch in over 1,000 years since King Brandon the Unifier had brought together the lands beyond the Wall and added them to the Northern Kingdom, and all the tunnels through the Wall were hollowed out and the gates left open. But the Wall still stood, a great monument and landmark of the North. The day John left, he visited Bran in his bed, who had not yet awoken since his fall. John had put off visiting him for he knew Lady Caitlin would be there and would not suffer John's presence. But John went to say goodbye to Bran, and when Lady Caitlin demanded him to leave and used harsh words, John refused. The last word Lady Caitlin said to John was that it should have been him who fell rather than Bran. Lady Stark John greeted in a formal manner, rising to his feet and bowing his head. "Snow," she acknowledged, her tone cold and her expression grim as it always was. "I did not think to find you at my son's side in his war councils both yesterday and today," she said sternly as she stepped forward into the room. "Robb is my commander, I stand where he asks me to," John stated. "Then it is clear my son still has much to learn of warfare. Baseborns belong in the infantry, not at the war councils." Lady Caitlin gazed down at Ghost, whose red eyes were locked with hers. "When last I saw you, you departed Winterfell with the imp, Tyrion Lannister," Lady Caitlin recounted. "I did. We visited the Wall and returned to Winterfell together. It was there we parted ways. As I understand it, you took him prisoner on the King's Road after that." Caitlin turned her gaze back on John, her glare seeming to accuse John of speaking insolently. "I believed the dwarf was complicit in the murder of Jon Arryn and was responsible for 2 attempts on Bran's life, first the Fall then the Cutthroat. I took him as a prisoner to face justice at the Eyrie. As I am now aware," John assured the Lady Stark. "What was your relationship with the imp during your travels with him?" John took a moment to choose his words. He would not lie to the Lady Stark and spoke plainly. "In truth, I thought him a good man. I liked him, even trusted him. When Robb told me of what he had done, I struggled to believe it," John admitted. "So you believe him innocent?" Lady Caitlin asked, with an expression showing what seemed like intrigue. "I said I struggled to believe it. I knew the dwarf for a few weeks, we bonded and liked one another, but I hold his trust in little regard when compared to that of my father's. If you arrested Tyrion on my father's orders, I believe him more than the dwarf. Besides, it's well known in the North that southern nobles are greatly skilled deceivers." Lady Caitlin held John's gaze for a moment, seeming to debate with herself if the note on southern nobles was directed at her. "Your initial assessments of the dwarf's character might not be entirely unfounded," Lady Caitlin admitted. John's brow furrowed, unsure what Lady Stark meant. "My lady. During his captivity, he saved my life when we were set upon by mountain clansmen. Furthermore, the implications that he had anything to do with the attempt on Bran's life were skeptical." "How so?" John asked, folding his arms. Lady Caitlin's eyes narrowed. She seemed to be compiling her thoughts in her head. "During your travels with Tyrion Lannister, did he speak of his brother at all?" asked Lady Caitlin, her tone different somehow, less cold, John thought. "He said he was closest with his brother, he thinks the world of him, he says that his brother always looked after him, treated him well, unlike his father and sister." "Did he mention his brother's skills as a fighter?" Lady Caitlin inquired. "A few passing remarks here and there. He thinks the Kingslayer is the best swordsman alive," John recounted. "My lady, what is all this about?" asked John, confused by how any of what he was being made to recount was relevant. Lady Stark took a sharp breath through her nose before responding. "The dagger used by the footpad," Caitlin began. "Valyrian steel with a dragon bone hilt," John recounted, remembering the blade. "Such a weapon was far too great of value to belong to some common cutthroat, therefore it stands to reason that the footpad was armed by his employer. That is why Sir Roderick and I left Winterfell, to find the blade's owner. Someone I know, someone I trust, told me the dagger belonged to Lord Tyrion, that he won it in a wager during Prince Joffrey's name-a-day." "What was the wager?" asked Jon. "Loras Tyrell and Jaime Lannister in the joust. Tyrell won." Jon shook his head gently. "Tyrion wouldn't bet against his family." "Whoever told you that has lied to you, my lady. If this liar truly was the owner of the dagger used to try and kill Bran, is it possible?" "No," Catelyn declared sternly. "No, he would never do something so unspeakable, and I will not hear conjectures from the likes of you, bastard," Lady Catelyn declared, reverting to her cold demeanor. Lady Catelyn's expression changed to one of despair as she began to fiddle with her hands. "The gods are cruel to me as of late," she uttered in a voice wrought with pain. "My family is scattered to the wind, all of them facing their own dangers, all the while I am here, helpless. And worse still, the person my eldest son trusts most, the person who will ride into battle with him, counsel him, the person who I must trust to protect Robb and to help him save my father, brother, husband and daughters is you," Lady Catelyn said, saying "you" as though it were a slanderous term. "I'd rather ask Benjen or even Theon to pledge to me that they'd keep Robb safe, but the person Robb holds in the highest esteem and will keep closest to his side, is my husband's whoreborn bastard," Catelyn declared. "So I will have you swear it." "Swear to me, bastard. Before your gods and mine. Swear you will protect my son and do all in your power to save my husband and my daughters. That is the only way I can trust you. Swear it to me now, or I will have my uncle hack you to pieces." A year ago, Jon would be a pitiful stuttering boy, begging Lady Catelyn's forgiveness just for breathing in her presence, but not now, not after the way he left things when he saw her last. There was much in the world that Jon needed to fear, but Lady Catelyn was no longer one of them. "Forgive me, my lady," Jon said sternly, "but I am not here to protect your son, nor save your husband, nor your daughters. I am here to protect my brother, save my father and my sisters. You will have no oath from me because I owe you none. I owe you no assurances of my loyalty because my loyalty comes from the Stark blood that courses through my veins. I may be a bastard, but Lord Stark is my father and Robb, Sansa, Arya and the boys are my siblings. As much as you may hate it, they are my family and I love each and every one of them, and I will not pretend otherwise for your sake, my lady." Lady Catelyn held Jon in her scornful eyes for a moment. She breathed deep through her nose as though she meant to spit fire in his face like Balerion the Black Dread, but a moment passed and the lady calmed herself. "Very well, bastard. But if my son falls in battle, may the gods forbid it, and you still draw breath by some cruel twist of fate, I will kill you myself for failing to protect him." Jon did not shudder, did not flinch, and his face was as cold and emotionless as Catelyn's had always been when she looked upon him. Whatever happened, Jon would not let Lady Catelyn leave his chamber without knowing he was no longer afraid of her. "Is there anything else, my lady?" Jon queried, but Lady Catelyn only rolled her eyes and turned to the door. It was only then that Jon and Lady Catelyn realized that Benjen was standing in the doorway. For how long, neither of them could be sure. An awkwardness hung in the air for a moment before Benjen cleared his throat and spoke. "The ceremony will be beginning soon. You're both requested to join Robb," Benjen declared. Catelyn nodded and walked off, passing Benjen and paying Jon no heed. Jon collected his sword and sheathed it and made for the door. Benjen stopped him and put his hand on Jon's pauldron-covered shoulder. "You're exactly where you need to be," Benjen said softly. "This war is our winter, and winter has come. The wolf pack is strongest when it's together." "I know," Uncle Jon said gently. Benjen pat his nephew on the shoulder and the two left Jon's chamber with Ghost scurrying past Benjen's legs before he closed the door behind him. Jon and Benjen left a wide berth between them and Lady Catelyn before proceeding out of the gatehouse tower. Outside in the swampy meadows of Moat Cailin, the entire army crowded together, fully clad in armor and weapons, many of them bearing torches to illuminate the army in hues of orange in the dark of night. The soldiers pulled apart and cleared a path through the crowd as Lady Catelyn approached, escorted by 4 of her Vale Knights, 2 in front and 2 behind. Jon and Benjen followed behind, the way remaining clear for them and the path closing behind them. At the end of the path, Robb stood with Theon, fully dressed in armor and fur cloaks atop a stone base of an old tower at a shallow hill. Banner bearers and torchbearers were spread out near him and a row of drummers standing below him. Lady Catelyn was escorted up the hill to Robb's side and stood adjacent to Theon. Jon and Benjen followed up, Benjen standing next to Catelyn and Jon standing next Theon with Ghost taking a position across from Grey Wind, the two wolves positioned Segent on either side of Robb. From the hill, Jon had a view of the Great Northern Army. The ones closest to the front were clear to see, but the further back the rows went the more they blurred into a sea of orange spots illuminated in the torchlight. 19,700 men preparing for their march to war. The Northern Army varied in attire, most wore either steel nasal helms or spangen helms, some adorned with eye guards and others with veils of chainmail. Most clad themselves in brigandines, chainmail, splint cuirasses, or boiled leathers adorned with studs or ringmail. There were some who wore pauldrons, greaves or gauntlets of steel, mostly knights from White Harbor. The ones from further north, like the Umbers, the Mormonts, the mountain clansmen clad themselves in woolly pelts of animal furs over their shoulders. The weapons wielded by the soldiers varied from pikes and swords to bearded battle axes both of short and long handles, mauls, spiked maces, cudgels and war-picks. The shields were mostly kite shields and some round shields with steel or iron umber at their centers. The giants stood further down the back in the distance, covered by shaggy pelts of fur that were thicker below their waists than above. Their heads were thrust forward from their shoulder blades. They had squashed-in faces with square teeth and tiny eyes amidst folds of horny flesh. Gathered together with the knights from White Harbor were the 50 knights of the Vale who came with Lady Catelyn and the Mardalis, most clad in shiny steel plate with the Blackfish standing in front. The Northmen knocked their weapons against their shields, matching the beat of their drummer men who stood before the hill, facing the crowd. Once all were gathered and settled and the drum beat was all that could be heard, Robb raised his hand and men in the crowd signaled the drummers to cease and all fell silent. "My friends," Robb called out, speaking in the old tongue, which all but the 50 Vale Knights and Sir Brynden could understand. "Almost 16 years ago, many of you here today were gathered together in this same place, in a great northern army such as this. An army assembled by my Lord Father, your liege, Eddard Stark." A great cheer erupted from the crowd, banging their shields and calling out to the sky. When they settled, Robb continued. "You fought beside him, stood with him in fields of mud and corpses and battled against the Mad King Aerys' armies. He told me your names and the great deeds you all did in battle and said to me and my brothers that if a man looks for his true friends, he will find them on the battlefield." Another cheer erupted from the crowd. "After many great victories, you, brave warriors, and my father overthrew the Mad King, avenged my grandfather, avenged my uncle, avenged my aunt and avenged the 200 Northmen that went south never to return." Cheers rang out again. "And after giving the Baratheon King Robert the Iron Throne and 7 kingdoms, who did he decide to share it with?" The next sound to rise from the army was not a cheer, but loud bitter grunts of detest. "With cowards, liars, schemers, murderers. A family who hid beneath their rock while you warred with the Mad King. Who waited until after the war was all but won to raise their banners. An army that won no battles, challenged no armies, but sacked a city of defenseless southerners and murdered children to curry favor with their new king. Not our way. Not warrior to warrior, but waged on innocent and defenseless men, women and children. Who were these cowards?" "Lannister," the crowd shouted, grunting and yelling angrily. "Yes. Yes. The Lannisters," Robb confirmed. "Now many of you here will surely remember Lord Jon Arryn of the Vale, my uncle through his marriage to my aunt Lysa, a man many of you fought alongside in Robert's rebellion, a man you knew as friend, comrade and a Southron brother in arms." The men cheered once again praising Jon Arryn, and the Vale Knights who heard his name joined in. "Now your comrade and friend, my uncle, is dead. Murdered by the Lannisters. My brother Bran, a boy of 8, will never walk again because a Lannister pushed him from a tower. A cutthroat tried to kill him when he slept along with my mother on the order of the Lannisters." Robb's words were emboldening the anger and loud battle cries of his army. "And when my father, who was beckoned south to serve King Robert, tried to make these so-called nobles answer for their crimes, the new boy King Joffrey put him in chains on orders of his Lannister mother and took my sisters as hostages." At this point the army was screaming to the heavens, fueled with vengeance and rage. "Now, we have received word that my grandsire, Hoster Tully, who you also fought alongside in Robert's war, is besieged in his own castle by the Lannisters, while Lord Tywin burns his lands and slaughters his people. Now I beg of you, lords and warriors alike, any who fought in Robert's rebellion, I beg of you to think of the riverman, the lord, knight or foot soldier you fought alongside, that you called friend, that you sat by the campfire with and ate alongside, and know that they and their families are currently being slaughtered and pillaged by the Lannisters. Again a loud bellow called out from the crowd. No lord should ever ask a man to do something he would not do himself. Which is why I, Robb of the House Stark, the blood of Color, ask you here and now before the sight of gods and men. Follow me. Follow me to war. Follow me to liberation. Follow me to justice. And a final great bellow cried out, so loud and mighty even the Vale Knights who knew nothing of what Robb was saying joined in and cheered. After a spell when the war cries died down, the drumming began again, as well as the blowing of horns, and the playing of flutes and lyres. Down the center of the army, something was coming forward, with the soldiers parting the way to let whatever was coming through. When the front line of nobles in the army parted ways, out from the crowd came priests and priestesses of the old gods, dressed in white tunics and gowns of linen embroidered with red thread, twigs and branches woven into their hair, their skin and hair painted white and red tears painted streaming down their faces like the tears of the sacred wirewood trees. Some of the priests and priestesses played music, while others danced carrying smoking bundles of sage leaves. From the group of priests came Leaf, who dressed in a cloak of red painted leaves, and upon her head a twisted crown of white painted branches. She held in one hand a wooden staff and a rattle made of branches and bones stringed together in the other. Leaf chanted and muttered to herself as she shook her rattle and moved around to the rhythm of the music with wide steps. Then she called out to the path through the army from where she came, and John noticed more painted priests, carrying a large wooden platform carried by two poles on either side like a litter, and mounted on top of it, bound in ropes, was a great big lizard lion. Scaly four-legged creatures with long sharp-toothed snouts and ridged backs that went all the way down to its tail and yellow slit eyes. Its arms, legs, waist, tail and head were fixed to the platform with ropes, and two bands were wrapped around its snout. It was tradition for a shaman to make an offering to the gods before a march to war, but John was not sure what manner of beast to expect Leaf would find at Moat Cailin. As the music loudened and the beat quickened, the army joined in once again, banging their weapons to their shields, and the giants further back were stomping their feet. The army we march to face. Leaf began, calling out to the crowd in the old tongue. They think of themselves as lions, she continued. Some of the crowd began to laugh and scoff at the Lannisters' expense. But they are cowardly, they are slippery, they strike from the shadows and use poison to kill, that is the way of a serpent. And a mocking hiss arose from the crowd. So what better sacrifice for the gods in our coming war than a beast that is both lion and lizard? And just like that, Leaf's reasoning for her choice of sacrifice was made clear to all. Leaf handed her staff to one of the priests and pulled out a long curved dagger of dragon glass. She spread out her arms and closed her eyes and faced the sky. I call out to the gods, she chanted loudly to the sky. Old ones, hear me call to you. The pace of the drumming quickened. I call to you and ask you to witness us. Witness your people as they fight. Witness them fight in your name and your honor. Witness the honor and strength of your faithful. Leaf began to sway to the music with her arms still out. Hear me, Afulda, dragon god of magic, king of the gods and all living things. Hear me, Alessa, owl goddess of peace and laws, queen of the gods. Hear me, Skarn, bear god of war and men. Hear me, Kala, direwolf god of winter and honor and scion of the house of Stark. John exchanged looks with both Robb and Benjen, recalling the myths of how Brandon the Builder was the demigod child of the winter god Kala. Hear me, Vigar, Kraken god of the tides and seas. Theon got extra excited at Vigar's mention, for he was worshipped in the Iron Islands as the drowned god. Hear me, Vindrana, eagle goddess of winds, birds and skies. Hear me, Frania, fox goddess of love and fertility. Hear me, Lorna, stag god of animals, nature and those who sing the song of earth. Those who sing the song of earth being what the children of the forest called themselves. Leaf went through all the gods worshipped in the north, Netos, horse goddess of music and art, Odin, mammoth god of the mountains, builders and giants, Yarvil, boar god of fire and blacksmiths, Thranduil, fish god of knowledge and wisdom, Rogva, rabbit god of family and harvest, Tros, squirrel god of literature and history, and as more and more gods were called out to hear Leaf, the drumming got louder and louder. Eventually, after all the other gods were called out, Leaf lifted her knife high to call the last. Hear me Rondrim, serpent god of death. The drumming and pounding of shields had dissolved into wild thundering. I make you all this offering and ask you for aid in this time of war. And finally, Leif brought the knife down with a single plunge, driving the blade through the skull of the lizard lion, and all noise ceased. In the silence, Leif rose and pulled the blade from the lizard's skull and raised her knife high for all to see. The North is called to war, she cried. And the North will answer, the Northerners shouted back in the old tongue. As the crowd turned into a mob of cheering and shouting and calling up to the gods, Leif slit the beast's throat and poured its blood into a wide wooden basin. When the basin was full, she went to each of the northern lords and painted symbols on their faces as they knelt, but not the Mandaelis or the Vale Knights. Then she climbed the hill and Robb knelt before her, accepting the markings of blood on his face, then Benjen, then Theon and finally Jon, but not Caitlyn, for she was not of the old gods. Lastly, Leif let Ghost and Grey Wind lick the blood from her fingers, and with that, the ritual was complete and the cries of war were sounded. The Northmen were dancing and cheering and praying to the old gods in their great shouting at the sky. Jon and Theon closed in around Robb and patted him on the back, congratulating him in his speech, while Leif went to speak with Benjen and the Lady Caitlyn. Robb cleared his throat, clearly, all his yelling having taken its toll on him. "What did you think of my speech?" he asked, looking at Jon. Jon shrugged. "A bit long for my taste, but the army seemed to love it." "Ha! All but those bloody southerners. Poor shits couldn't understand a word you were saying," Theon japed. "Did you see the look on that knight's face? The one with the shield marked with the yellow cross and all the black stars on it. He just about fainted when Leif stabbed the lizard lion." The three began laughing, sharing a tender moment, but distraction came when the clinking of steel followed by low murmurs came from the crowd and the cheering began to die down. The source of the change in tone came from the Mandaeli area, where a small circle had formed, and in the middle of it one of Lady Caitlyn's Vale Knights and a Northman were clashing sword and axe. "Oh, for fuck's sake!" Jon grunted as he lunged forward, jumping from the shallow hill to the grass below and hurrying through the crowd. "Move! Move!" Jon commanded as he pushed past the Northerners and Vale Knights in his way. Jon broke through the crowd and made it into the circle. In the center of the circle, the axe-wielding Northman was Darin Hornwood, son of Lord Harleys. The Vale Knight, a Belmer based on his purple tabard over his plate armor marked with 6 silver bells. "Enough," shouted Jon, but no one heard him. "Darin! That's enough!" Jon shouted once more, for he knew Darin and carried his spear for him years ago during a hunt in the Wolfswood when he and his father visited Winterfell. Jon felt astounded and angry at what he was seeing. His father and sisters were fearing for their lives, and 2 soldiers were already hacking and slashing at one another rather than their Lannister enemies. Without thinking, Jon rushed forward, drawing his steel sword, deciding this was the time to use his tool of men, as Sir Roderick called it. Jon first used his blade to block a strike from Darin's axe, then when Darin stumbled back from the momentum of Jon's slash, Jon turned and parried away the Belmer's sword. What came next was a series of strikes from the Belmer and from Darin, some directed at one another and some directed at Jon, all of which Jon either blocked or parried. Eventually, Jon locked swords with the Belmer Knight and Darin came at Jon with his axe raised. For a moment Jon thought he'd die there and then, but with a desperate kick, he launched his foot into Darin's stomach, sending him tumbling back, winded by Jon's boot. Next, Jon was able to get the upper hand against the Belmer, disarming him and dropping his blade to the ground. Darin came back for another attack, but with one swift strike, Jon cleaved the handle of the 2-handed bearded axe in half, leaving Darin with a stick in one hand and a much shorter axe in the other. But while he was looking at his weapon in shock and confusion, Jon took the opportunity and put the blade to his throat. Cheers began to erupt from the crowd as though Jon had won a tourney duel. "Enough!" Jon shouted, silencing the onlookers, for he saw nothing joyous about the matter. "Jon," said Darin, as though he'd only just recognized him. "What the fuck is this madness, Darin?" Jon asked angrily but lowered his sword. "That Southron cunt insulted our faith and our people. He spoke ill of our shaman and threatened us," Darin declared, pointing his finger at the Belmer Knight. When Jon turned to face the knight, he was reaching for his sword, but Jon swatted it from his grasp with the end of his blade. "My father was killed by hill tribesmen. All my life, our beautiful Vale has been plagued by pillagers and raiders from the mountain clans. I came here to join an army to avenge my liege lord and aid our allies in the Riverlands. I did not come to break bread with the northern cousins of those savage wildlings and watch them perform heathen rituals with that demon monkey. Many of the northerners grew angry and murmured. Jon too felt anger grow within him. The children of the forest were a sacred people in the faith of the old gods, and to speak ill of them by calling one a demon monkey was a great offense. Star-worshipping dog cunt! Darin shouted as he lunged at the Belmore, but Jon shoved him back, though barely, given Darin was much bigger and much older than Jon. This is not helping anyone. Old feuds of faith that date back to the Andal invasion will not bring Jon Arryn peace, nor save the Tullys or Lord Stark. We cannot divide. We must march as one. I will fight the Lannisters, but not with heathens. They killed my family. They are my enemy, shouted the Belmore. Look around you, sir. Robb commanded, breaking through the crowd with Theon and Benjen at his flanks. You stand before an army of heathens, marching south to aid you and the Riverlords in defending against the Lannisters who have committed crimes against all three of our realms. I too am a heathen worshipper of the old gods. Would you cut me down for the Sarkhay of your father and slay the cousin of your liege lord Robert Arryn? Or will you ride beside me and litter the south with slain Lannisters, who worship your gods and killed Lord Jon Arryn all the same? Belmore stood for a moment and hesitated, then dropped to his knee. I beg your pardon, my lord, I acted in an unworthy manner, the knight pleaded. Let it be forgotten, sir, only never again forget who your true allies are, Robb commanded, sounding more like their father in Jon's ears. And you, Darin? Should I remind you of your stay at Winterfell when our fathers talked of their experiences at the Battle of the Bells, and how your father praised the rivermen and Valymen he fought alongside and credited a knight of House Skrull for saving his life? Darin seemed to shrink as he looked to his feet in shame for his actions. It does not matter if you pray to the old gods or to the Seven, it does not matter if you call yourself blood of the first men or an Andal, we are all bound together by a cause, and a righteous one at that. Robb declared, speaking to his army once again. Tomorrow we march together as one, a single united army. If any cannot stomach that, then take your arms and armor and ride home tonight before I have the chance to hang you as an oath breaker. And with that, the crowd began to disperse, the bloodlust and the excitement of the ceremony having been snuffed like a flame, and all the warriors seeming to be going off to bed. Benjen came over to Jon and started checking him, looking for any cuts or strikes he might have received, but Jon was unharmed. Are you all right? Benjen asked, wishing to hear his nephew confirm it from his own mouth. I'm fine, Jon reassured his uncle. You could have gotten yourself killed, a stern but quiet voice declared. Jon turned to face the man who spoke, Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. The Blackfish's expression was cold and his eyes narrowed as he slowly walked closer to Jon. This is war we're marching to, it's harsh, bloody, unfair and easy to die in. The last thing we need is some foolish boy who's never seen combat getting himself killed. From the way he spoke, Jon could already tell, the Blackfish, who had never even set eyes upon him before, did not like him. Some might call what you just did brave. But you were lucky those two were more focused on killing each other rather than you. Either one could have made a corpse of you, the Blackfish stated, pointing to both Jon's previous combatants. Men can earn great glory in battle, make names for themselves, earn respect and reputation, even commoners, second sons, bastards. Now you're not here looking for glory, are you? Bastard, the Blackfish inquired. I'm here for my family, Jon declared sternly. Good. Good. The Blackfish nodded his head, though still seemed to look bitterly at Jon. Because bastards, well, if they stay quiet, keep their heads down, do what they are told and follow orders, they are soon forgotten. But a bastard with a reputation, bastards who do stupid brave things and manage to survive, they are remembered, the shame they bring to their family is remembered, and the disrespect their presence has on their noble parents' spouse is remembered, the Blackfish uttered, looking to Lady Catelyn, who stood watching from the hill. You claim to love your father and his children. Then I can trust you wouldn't do anything that might immortalize the shame placed upon their dear beloved mother's name. Can I? Before Jon could respond, Benjen stepped in. That's enough, Blackfish. Jon has never said a word ill of Lady Catelyn nor offered her any offense. Whatever insults or shame has reached her come from the lips of gossiping nobles with bastards of their own scored in the dozens. In the north, a man gets what he earns when he earns it, and if Jon gets glory and status for his valor in battle, That is his by right. The Blackfish and Benjen held each other's stern gazes for a moment before the Blackfish glanced at John and walked off. You didn't have to, Uncle John said shyly. But I did, John. You deserved none of that, Benjen reassured his nephew. Rob came over, noticing the Blackfish pass by bitterly. Is everything all right? He inquired, looking at John. Yes, everything's fine, John stated plainly. Rob's peering eyes suggested he suspected there was more to it, but he did not press the matter. As the night unwinded, Rob and John then went back to the gatehouse tower and shared a half-cup of ale as they recounted their youth, fighting with wooden swords, making believe they were fighting in the Long Night or Robert's Rebellion, but now that they were on the cusp of going to war themselves, there was nothing glorious about it, only fear and nervousness. Stay close to me when the fighting begins, Rob asked of John. Always, John replied in a gentle tone as though he were surprised his brother even had to ask. With that, the two finished their horns of ale and went to their beds. Chapter 3, The Twins. Chapter text. As the host trooped down the causeway through the black bogs of the neck and spilled out into the riverlands beyond, Benjen remained close to the front of the column, keeping Rob always in sight. Like a true commander, Rob rode at the front of the column beneath the flapping white banner of Winterfell, always with John trailing close behind, but each day he would ask one of his lords to join him and ride by his side so that they might confer as they marched. The vanguard spread out behind them, a slow-moving forest of lances and banners and spears. Rob honored each man in turn with being allowed to ride at his side, showing no favorites, listening as his lord father had listened. If it had not been for the mop of auburn head upon Rob's head, Benjen might have thought he was staring at his brother. When Benjen was young, he remembered sitting with his brothers and sister before their lord father Ricard. He told them, if you make a man kneel and swear an oath to you, he will fight for you because he has to, but if you have him sit and share your food with him, he will fight because he wants to. Clearly, Ned had passed such lessons on to his own children, and it seemed to work, for as Benjen rode with his eyes fixed on Rob, his ears listened for the murmurs of doubt and second-guessing from the lords behind him, but after every lord had their day with Rob and returned down the column the next day, they became his defenders rather than his second-guessers. There was nothing treasonous about the lords questioning Rob. Each man was loyal to House Stark, and so many among them respected Ned or even loved him like kin. But while a Northman's loyalty and honor was a sacred thing, it was not blind, and Rob was 15 years old, never tested in battle. They questioned his leadership not only for their own safety and their armies but for his as well. But the more lords who took turns riding at the front of the column with Rob, the more the opinion of Rob changed, with the lords sharing and conversing about what they'd seen of him. But not only did the lords learn more of Rob's character, for Rob too was learning, listening to his lords and weighing their words and opinions against the others. He's learned so much from Ned, Catelyn once remarked as she rode at Benjen's side, and Benjen wholeheartedly agreed with her. The Blackfish had taken 100 picked men and 100 swift horses and raced ahead to screen their movements and scout the way. Rob also had the winged skin changers scout forward. The skin changers would either sit in transport carts or on horses with their leads taken by a footman and enter the minds of their animal companion, hawks, owls, eagle, ravens, sparrows and the like, and see through their eyes for any coming dangers. The reports Sir Bryndon's riders and the skin changers brought back were not of any particularly good tidings. Lord Tywin's host was still many days to the south, but Walder Free, the Lord of the Crossing, had assembled a force of near 4,000 men at his castles on the Green Fork. Late again, Catelyn murmured. Benjen knew all too well what Lady Catelyn was talking of. Walder Free earned his epithet, Walder the Late, during Robert's Rebellion. The combined armies of the Baratheons, Starks, Arryns and Tullys met Prince Rhaegar's host on the Trident, but the Freys did not arrive until late in the battle. By the time their army arrived on the field, Rhaegar was dead and the royalist morale was broken. It was well known but unspoken in the Riverlands and the North that Walder waited so long to join the battle to see which way the fight would go. Had Robert lain dead and Rhaegar rallied the royalists against the rebels, Free would have turned on Lord Hoster and the rebels and attacked them instead. It would seem to Benjen that Walder Free was cut from the same cloth as Lord Tywin, who waited out the entire rebellion in Casterly Rock, and after the Trident, when Robert had all but won, Tywin raised his banners and rode hard for the defenseless King's Landing. Then entering the city under a false flag of friendship, he sacked the city, murdering innocent men, women and children and calling it a rebel victory to buy his high status in the coming Baratheon dynasty. 4,000 men. Rob repeated, more perplexed than angry. Lord Free cannot hope to fight the Lannisters by himself. Surely he hopes he means to join his power to ours. Does he? Catelyn asked. She had left Benjen's side and ridden forward to join Robb and Robert Glover, his companion of the day. I wonder. Expect nothing of Walder Free and you will never be surprised, Catelyn declared. He's your father's bannerman, Robb pointed out. Some men take their oaths more seriously than others. Robb and Lord Walder were always more friendly with Casterly Rock than my father would have liked. One of his sons is wed to Tywin Lannister's sister, which means little itself to be sure. Lord Walder has sired a great many children over the years and they must marry someone. Still, she mused, seeming to ensnare herself in her own thoughts. Do you think he means to betray us to the Lannisters, my lady? Robert Glover asked, his voice carrying down to Benjen in a grave-sounding tone. Though her head was facing the road before her, Benjen could hear a clear sigh come from Catelyn. If truth be told, I doubt even Lord Free knows what Lord Free intends to do. He has an old man's caution and a young man's ambition and has never lacked for cunning. We must have the twins, Mother Robb said heatedly. There is no other way to cross the river, you know that. Yes, and so does Walder Free, you can be sure about that. That night, they made camp on the southern edge of the bogs, halfway between the King's Road and the river. It was there Theon Greyjoy brought them further word from the Blackfish. Sir Brynden says to tell you he's crossed swords with the Lannisters and there are a dozen scouts who won't be reporting back to Lord Tywin any time soon, or ever, he grinned. Sir Adam Marbrand commands the Outriders and he's pulling back south, burning as he goes. He knows where we are more or less, but the Blackfish vows he will not know when we split. Unless Lord Free tells him, Catelyn said sharply, peering into the golden glow of the campfire. Theon, when you return to my uncle, tell him he is to place his best bowmen around the twins day and night with orders to bring down any raven they see leaving the battlements. I want no birds bringing word of my son's movements to Lord Tywin, Catelyn declared sharply. Benjen winced and glanced over to Robb, who sat silently, which was troubling to Benjen. Since becoming Lady of Winterfell, Catelyn had made for herself a strong voice of a leader and had earned the right to use it in the years she'd faithfully served the North, but never in Ned's presence would she make a unilateral decision on her lord husband's behalf. Now Outriders under Robb's command were to take orders from Lady Catelyn, without so much as a glance to her son to confirm it was what he wished. Sir Brynden has seen to it already, my lady, Theon replied with a cocky smile. Furthermore, the Skinchanger scouts are using their hawks and eagles to snatch the ravens from the sky. A few more blackbirds and we should have enough to bake a pie. I'll save you their feathers for a hat. I should have expected that my uncle would have been well ahead of me, Catelyn chided herself. My father once told me that the Blackfish was as good with his wits as he was with a sword, said Benjen, thinking back on the tales his father had told him of when he fought in the Stepstones during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Catelyn smiled, but then quickly turned her attention back to Theon. What have the Freys been doing while the Lannisters burn their fields and plunder their holdfasts? There's been some fighting between Sir Adam's men and Lord Walder's, Theon answered. Not a day's ride from here, we found 2 Lannister scouts feeding the crows where the Freys had strung them up. Most of Lord Walder's strength remains amassed at the twins though. No doubt waiting to see who was winning the war before picking a side, Benjen thought to himself. Well, if he's been fighting the Lannisters, perhaps he does mean to hold to his vows, Robb said. The Lannisters burn a few free fields and the Freys string up some Lannister scouts isn't the same as fighting one another. Walder Free and Tywin Lannister are cold bastards and won't let the deaths of some scouts and farmers get in the way of a possible alliance if Walder sees the Lannisters winning, Benjen declared. Catelyn nodded in agreement. Defending his own lands is one thing, open battle against Lord Tywin quite another. Robb turned back to Theon. Has the Blackfish found any other way across the Green Fork? Theon shook his head. He sent 2 Skinchanger birds to scout the fork, one upriver, one down. The river's running high and fast, Sir Brynden says it can't be forded, not this far north. There's a few spots that the giants might be able to wade through, but unless you intend to have 8 giants ferry the army across by carrying them overhead, it does us no good. I must have that crossing. Robb declared, fuming. Oh, our horses might be able to swim across the river, I suppose, but not with armored men on their backs. We'd need to build rafts to pull our steel across, helms and mail and weapons, but we don't have the trees for that, or the time. Lord Tywin is marching north. Robb balled his hand into a fist. Lord Walder would be a fool to try and bar our way, Theon said with his customary easy confidence. We have 5 times his numbers, you can take the twins if you need to, Robb. Not easily, Catelyn warned them, and not in time. While you are mounting your siege, Tywin Lannister would bring up his host and assault you from the rear. Robb glanced from his mother to Theon, then to Jon and lastly to Benjen, looking for an answer and finding none. What would my lord father do? Robb asked, his eyes darting between Benjen and Catelyn. Find a way across, Catelyn said, whatever it took. The next morning it was Sir Brynden Tully himself who rode back to them. He had put aside the heavy plate and helm he'd worn when he arrived with Catelyn's host of Vale Knights and Marndaelis for the lighter leather and mail of an outrider, but his obsidian fish still fastened his cloak, though now a woolly dark grey cloak hung from his shoulders rather than one of blue and red. The black fisher's face was grave as he swung down from his horse. It seems all the information gathered by those birds and rodents of yours was true. There was a battle under the walls of Riverrun just as your skin changes, said he, recounted, his mouth grim. We had it from a Lannister outrider we took captive. Everything was as your animal friends described it. The Kingslayer has destroyed Edmure's host and sent the Lords of the Trident reeling in flight. Benjen stroked his chin and thought. Did the outrider give us anything new? How goes the siege? Benjen inquired. And what of my brother? Catelyn asked, her voice shuddering. The same as it was. Edmure is still wounded and held as a prisoner. Lord Blackwood and the other survivors remain inside and under siege, surrounded by Jaime's host. Robb looked fearful. We must get across this accursed river if we're to have any hope of relieving them in time. That will not be easily done, the Blackfish cautioned. Lord Free has pulled his whole strength inside his castles and his gates are closed and barred. Others take the grey-haired fuck. Robb swore in the old tongue, invoking the name of the ancient enemy. Robb Benjen addressed his nephew in a scolding manner, not only for his swearing but for losing his calm. If the old fool does not relent and let me cross, he'll leave me no choice but to storm his walls. I'll have my men fell whatever trees I can find and sharpen into rams and drive them into his gates or pour oil over them and have the giants hurl them over his walls while they are set ablaze. I'll pull the twins down around his ears if I have to. We'll see how well he likes that. You sound like a sulky boy, Robb, Catelyn said sharply. A child sees an obstacle and his first thought is to run around it or knock it down. A lord must learn that sometimes words can accomplish what swords cannot. Robb's neck reddened at the rebuke. Once again Benjen felt uneasy, for as much as he agreed with Catelyn, the tone she spoke to Robb with was inappropriate. Any man in Robb's army could offer him counsel not to attack the twins, but the way Catelyn presented her belittling reprimand was as though she were forbidding him to go through with his intent. Benjen loved Cat like a sister. She was a faithful wife to Ned, a good lady of Winterfell and the North and the mother of all but one of Benjen's beloved nephews and nieces. As a mother and the Lady of Winterfell, Catelyn's voice stood above Robb's, but they were not in Winterfell and Robb was their commander, though since Moat Cailin, it seemed Lady Catelyn had not yet noticed. The night Cat arrived at Moat Cailin, she dismissed the entire war council and sent them from the hall, and the next morning Robb had decided a course of action different from what had been discussed with the lords without consulting them, a show of strength and assurance, but Benjen hoped it was Robb's plan, to begin with. Then the previous night, when Catelyn boldly told Theon how the Outriders should surround the twins, without Robb's leave. Catelyn was wise and her counsel was of great value, but if she continued to groom Robb to lean on her like a crutch, he'd never stand on his own 2 feet. Tell me what you mean, mother, he said meekly, breaking the image of a young red-haired Ned in Benjen's eyes that he'd embodied since Moat Cailin. The Freys have held the crossing for 600 years, and for 600 years they have never failed to exact their toll. What toll? What does he want? Robb asked. Catelyn smiled. That is what we must discover. And what if I do not choose to pay this toll? Asked Robb, asking his own questions and recognizing his own authority, and just like that the image of Ned in him was coming back into focus. Then you had best retreat back to Moat Cailin, deploy to meet Lord Tywin in battle or grow wings. I see no other choices, Catelyn stated. Catelyn put her heels to her horse and rode off, leaving her son to ponder her words. Perhaps you might reconvene your lords and discuss the most prudent course of action, or look over the maps once again and try and find your own way forward, Benjen suggested, trying to remind Robb of his autonomy. Rob sat for a moment on his horse and thought. I cannot help my uncle and grandfather nor my father and sisters from this side of the Green Fork. We ride on to the Twins and see how Lord Walder responds to our approach, then I'll decide my next move, Rob declared. Yes, Commander, you will, and no other, Benjen declared. It was near midday when the northern vanguard came in sight of the Twins, where the Lords of the Crossing had their seat. The Green Fork ran swift and deep there, but the phrase had spanned it many centuries past and grown rich off the coin men paid them to cross. Their bridge was a massive arch of smooth grey rock wide enough for 2 wagons to pass abreast. The water tower rose from the center of the span, commanding both road and river with its arrow slits, murder holes, and portcullises. The Twins, 2 squat ugly formidable castles identical in every respect with the bridge arching between, had guarded the crossing for centuries. High curtain walls, deep moats, and heavy oak and iron gates protected the approaches. The bridge footings rose from within stout inner keeps, there was a barbican and portcullis on either bank, and the water tower defended the span itself. While Benjen was uncomfortable with the amount of control Caitlin exerted upon Rob, he would not give Rob ill counsel just to spite her, and instantly fell into an agreement with Caitlin's objections to taking the Twins by force at seeing the battlements bristling with spears and swords and scorpions. There was an archer at every crenel and arrow slit, the drawbridge was up, the portcullis down, and the gates closed and barred. The Great Jon began to curse and swear in the old tongue as soon as he saw what awaited them. Lord Ricard Carstark glowered in silence. That cannot be assault, my lords, Roose Bolton announced. Nor can we take it by siege without an army on the far bank to invest the other castle, Helman Tallheart said gloomily. Across the deep running green waters, the western Twin stood like a reflection of its eastern brother. Even if we had the time, which to be sure we do not. As the northern lords studied the castle, a sally port opened, a planked bridge slid across the moat, and a dozen knights rode forth to confront them, led by 4 of Lord Walder's many sons. Their banners bore twin towers, dark blue on a field of silver grey. Sir Stephen Free, Lord Walder's heir, spoke for them. Sir Stephen was past 60 years of age and already a grandsire himself, and yet still waiting his turn to be Lord of the Twins, but if Lord Walder continued to cling to life as he did, his firstborn son would die of old age before becoming Lord of the Crossing. My Lord Father has sent me to greet you and inquire as to who leads this mighty host, Sir Stephen said, his manner seeming polite enough to Benjen. I do, Rob declared as he spurred his horse forward. He was dressed in his armor with the direwolf shield of Winterfell strapped to his saddle and Grey Wind panting by his side. Sir Stephen sized Rob up with a faint smile curled upon his weasel-like face, though his horse became uneasy and backed up nervously at Grey Wind's approach. My Lord Father would be most honored if you would share meat and mead with him in the castle and explain your purpose here. His words unsettled the northern bannermen, for not one of them approved of Sir Stephen's offer. They cursed, argued and shouted down each other in the old tongue, and Dongo the giant snarled, causing the knights and their horses to panic and shudder, fretfully. You must not do this, my Lord. Galbart Glover pleaded to Rob. Lord Walder is not to be trusted. Roose Bolton nodded. Go in there alone and you're his. He can sell you to the Lannisters, throw you in a dungeon or slit your throat as he likes. If he wants to talk to us, let him open his gates and we will all share his meat and mead, declared Wendell Marndaley. Or let him come and treat with Rob here, in plain sight of his men and ours, suggested his brother Sir Willis. Rob was considering his bannerman's words, weighing them carefully and formulating a decision, but before he could conclude his thoughts, Lady Caitlin spoke up again. I will go, she said loudly. Benjen stared at the red-haired lady of Winterfell, appalled by such a brazen declaration. Before Benjen had the chance to scold her, one of the northern lords interfered. You, my lady, the Great Jon furrowed his brow. Mother, are you certain? Clearly Rob was not, and worse, he was yielding to Caitlin's judgment and allowing her to decide for herself, and in doing so putting the army in her hands. Benjen quickly studied the faces of Rob's bannermen, checking for any discord in the eyes of his commanders, but they all seemed more concerned with Caitlin than with Rob's lack of assertiveness. Nevermore, Caitlin declared outright. Lord Walder is my father's bannerman. I've known him since I was a girl, he would never offer me any harm, she declared, seeming to overturn her earlier remarks on how untrustworthy Lord Walder was. I am certain my Lord Father would be pleased to speak with the Lady Caitlin, Sir Stephen said. To vouchsafe for our good intentions, my brother Sir Pewin will remain here until she is safely returned to you. He shall be our honored guest, said Rob. This is madness, Benjen thought to himself. Caitlin dictating Rob's stratagem, Caitlin giving orders on Rob's behalf, Caitlin countermanding Rob's authority, and now she declared herself Rob's ambassador to treat with Lord Walder and decide the terms for the crossing. Benjen could not begin to fathom the stresses that lay upon Kat's mind, her family scattered across the kingdoms and almost all of them in one form of peril or another, but she had no right to take such authority whether Rob was her son or not. Sir Pewin, the youngest of the 4 Freys in the party, dismounted and handed the reins of his horse to a brother. "I require the return of my lady mother by evening fall, Sir Stephen." "Wait." Benjen interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. I ask you, Rob, to allow me to accompany the Lady Caitlin." "That won't be necessary, Benjen, I assure you," Caitlin began, but Benjen spoke over her, paying her no heed and directing his words to Rob alone. "Please, Commander. I have been by your side at every war council and we've discussed your intentions at length. I believe I can represent your best interests in Lord Walder's court. I do not need to be minded or cared for like a pet," and Rob knows that, Caitlin declared scornfully. "What say you, Commander?" Benjen asked his nephew, still not acknowledging Caitlin's words. Rob thought for a moment, then responded with a nod. "Go. Uncle, you will represent my interests as you see them to Lord Walder." Caitlin became aggrieved, giving Benjen the kind of cold stare she usually reserved for John, but Benjen knew he made the right decision, and Rob choosing to make his own decision was victory of its own that would serve him in the trials ahead. "As I was saying, I require my lady mother and my uncle returned to me by evenfall, Sir Stephen," Rob went on. "It is not my intent to linger here long." Sir Stephen gave a polite nod. "As you say, my lord." Benjen and Caitlin spurred their horses forward with Lord Walder's sons and envoys falling in around them. When the Lord of the Crossing welcomed Caitlin and Benjen in the great hall of the East Castle, old Walder was surrounded by his 20 living sons, minus Sir Pewin, who would have made 21, 36 grandsons, 19 great-grandsons and numerous daughters, granddaughters, bastards and grand-bastards. The old Lord Walder was 90, having been born at the end of the reign of King Daeron the Good. Some described Walder as a pruned weasel, but Benjen saw a molted vulture with a bald spotted head, too gouty to stand unassisted. Walking beside Lord Walder's litter as they carried him in was a pale frail girl, no older than 16. At first, Benjen thought her a granddaughter or a serving girl, but when the herald introduced Lord Walder, it was revealed the young girl was his 8th and latest wife, Joyerzy Renford. Benjen glanced at Caitlin, wondering if he was being japed at to believe such a child would wed such an elderly and ugly old man, but Caitlin's look told Benjen, as uncomfortable as it was to behold, it was true. "It is a great pleasure to see you again after so many years, my lord," Caitlin said. The old man squinted at her suspiciously. "Is it? I doubt that. Spare me your sweet words, Lady Caitlin, I am too old. Why are you here? Is your boy too proud to come before me himself? What am I to do with you?" Benjen's eyebrows lifted in sheer surprise at such a voice, so hoarse and bitter, like one of the direwolves of Benjen's nephews when they snarled. "Father," Sir Stephen said reproachfully in a much gentler voice. "You forget yourself. Lady Stark is here at your invitation. Did I ask you? You are not Lord Free yet, not until I die. Do I look dead? I'll hear no instructions from you." "That is not the way to speak in front of our noble guest, father," one of his younger sons said. "Now my bastards presume to teach me courtesy," Lord Walder complained. "I'll speak any way I like, damn you. I've had 3 kings to guest in my life and queens as well. Do you think I require lessons from the likes of you, Roger? Your mother was milking goats the first time I gave her my seed." He dismissed the red-faced youth with the flick of his fingers and gestured to 2 of his other sons. "Danwell. Waylon. Help me to my chair." They shifted Lord Walder from his litter and carried him to the high seat of the Freys, a tall chair of black oak whose back was carved in the shape of 2 towers linked together by a bridge. His young wife crept up timidly and covered his legs with a blanket. When he was settled, the old man beckoned Caitlin forward and planted a kiss on her hand. "There," he announced. "Now that I've observed the courtesies, my lady, perhaps my sons will do me the honor of shutting their mouths." "Why are you here?" "To ask you to open your gates, my lord," Caitlin replied politely. "My son and his lord's bannermen are most anxious to cross the river and be on their way." "To Riverrun," he sniggered. "Oh, no need to tell me, no need. I'm not blind yet. The old man can still read a map. To Riverrun, Caitlin confirmed. She saw no reason to deny it. Where I might have expected to find you, my lord. You are still my father's bannerman, are you not? Said Lord Walder, a noise halfway between a laugh and a grunt. I called my swords, yes I did, and here they are. You saw them on the walls. It was my intent to march as soon as all my strength was assembled. Well, to send my sons, I'm well past marching myself, Lady Caitlin. He looked around and pointed to a tall stooped man of 50 years. Tell her, Jared. Tell her that was my intent. It was, my lady, said Sir Jared Free, one of his sons by his second wife, on my honor. Is it my fault that your fool brother lost his battle before we could march? He leaned back against his cushions and scowled at Caitlin. Well, now that your full strength is assembled, you can march south with us, Benjen interjected. Caitlin turned to Benjen, eyes widened and a distressed expression as though Benjen had just thrown a plate on the ground. Walder peered at Benjen and sniffled. Who the fuck are you? Walder growled in his raspy voice as though he'd only just realized Benjen was in the room. Benjen Stark, third son of Ricard. Benjen introduced himself. HRMPH, I remember your father, he was Edwyle's boy. A tough fucker, Ricard was, and strong too. I once saw him split a Tiroshi clean in half in the 5th Black Fira Rebellion with that big old Valyrian steel sword of his, Walder mumbled. I think you mean the War of the Nine Penny Kings, father, one of Walder's other sons corrected. Walder turned to the son sharply. Now you listen here, boy. I was there at the 2nd Black Fira Rebellion, though I was only a year old. I squired in the 3rd when I was 11 and I fought in the 4th as a knight. If I say that war down in the Stepstones was the 5th Black Fira Rebellion, then it fucking well was. Walder then turned his attention back to Benjen. I never liked your father, called me a dishonorable craven wretch once. He told me you called him worse, Benjen responded. Walder shrugged and giggled at himself. Your father was cooked, your brother choked, your sister raped, and now your other brother's gone and got himself locked up. Seems to me Starks who travel south of the neck don't last long. But you want me to follow some twat Stark lordling who still fiddles with his short and curlies to battle? Ha! I'm told the Kingslayer went through Edmure like an axe through ripe cheese. Why should my boys hurry south to die? All those who did go south are running north again. All the more reason we must reach Riverrun, and soon. Where can we go to talk, my lord? Asked Caitlin, reclaiming control of the conversation. We're talking now, Lord Free complained. What are you all looking at? He shouted at his kin. Get out of here. Lady Stark and not Lord Stark want to talk to me in private. Go all of you. Find something useful to do, yes you too, woman. Out. 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 As his sons and grandsons and daughters and bastards and nieces and nephews streamed from the hall, he leaned close to Caitlin and confessed, they're all waiting for me to die. Steven's been waiting for 40 years, but I keep disappointing him. Ha! Why should I die just so he can be a lord? I ask you, I won't do it. I have every hope that you will live to be 100, Caitlin said. Ha! That would boil them, to be sure. Oh, to be sure. Now what do you want to say? We want to cross, Caitlin told him. Oh, do you? That's blunt. Why should I let you? It seemed the veil of politeness Caitlin portrayed had finally been strained too much and torn, and she let her anger flare. If you were strong enough to climb your own battlements, Lord Free, you would see that my son has 20,000 men outside your walls. Ha! There'll be 20,000 corpses when Lord Tywine gets here, the old man shot back. You're forgetting something, Lord Free, Benjen quickly interjected before Walder could continue. Oh. And what's that? Walder asked. The waste, Benjen replied simply. Waste? What waste? The fuck are you on about, Stark? Asked Walder. The waste of arrows, spears, men, horses, effort. Why would Tywine throw his host on our northern army when we are engaged in a siege against you? Tywine's here to burn the Riverlands to ashes. Why not wait until we've depleted half our force trying to take the Twins before destroying our army? You may have been late to the Trident, my lord, but Tywine waited until after the Trident was won and the war was effectively over before raising his banners. Tywine Lannister has never picked the losing side in any fight. Why would he not wait until after we've destroyed you before coming after us? There are almost as many Lannisters as there are Freys. He could wait until you're all dead and put one of his distant cousins in your place. Your sister is married to a Frey, no? So ask yourself, Walder, why would Tywin need you? Benjen asked. Walder pondered Benjen's words for a moment but then sneered. Don't try to scare me, boy. Your brother's in some traitor's cell under the Red Keep. Your army's headed by a child. And you, Lady Catelyn, your father's sick and probably dying, and Jaime Lannister's got your brother in chains. What do you have that I should fear other than a hollow threat that I'll have to fight you alone? That son of yours. I'll match you son for son, and I'll still have 18 when yours are all dead. You swore an oath to my father, Catelyn declared. Walder bobbed his head from side to side with a grin on his face. Oh yes, I said some words, but I swore oaths to the crown too. Seems to me Joffrey's the king now, and that makes you two and your boy and all those northern tree worshippers outside no better than rebels. If had the sense the gods gave a fish, I'd hope the Lannisters boil you all. Then why don't you? Benjen challenged him. Lord Walder snorted with disdain. Lord Tywin the proud and splendid, Warden of the West, Hand of the King, oh what a great man that one is. Him and his gold this and gold that and lions here and lions there. I'll wager you, he eats too many beans. He breaks wind just like me, but you'll never hear him admit it, oh no. What's he got to be so puffed up about anyway? Only 2 sons and one of them's a twisted little monster. I'll match him son for son, and I'll still have 19 and a half when all of his are dead, he cackled. If Lord Tywin wants my help he can bloody well ask for it. I'm asking you, Lord Walder, Catelyn said gently. And my father and my brother and my lord husband and my son are asking with my voice. Walder then stuck one of his bony fingers in Catelyn's face. Save your sweet words, my lady. Sweet words I get from my wife. Did you see her? 16, she is. A little flower, and the honey's mead for me. I'll wager she gives me a son by this time next year. Perhaps I'll make him heir, wouldn't that boil the rest of them? What followed next was a seemingly endless string of grumblings and complaints from Lord Walder. First about how Catelyn's father didn't come for the wedding to his latest wife or the one before that. Then about Lord Hoster not marrying Edmure to one of his daughters, then about how his heirs were defeated in a tourney he attended. He also complained about Jon Arryn not being willing to foster 2 of Walder's grandsons or let him foster Robert Arryn. When Lord Arryn announced that his son was going to be fostered with Lord Stannis, Lysa stormed off and all that Jon could do was apologize. Catelyn asked if it was not Lord Tywin that Robert Arryn was to be fostered with, which angered Walder. Do you think I can't tell Lord Stannis from Lord Tywin? They are both bungholes who think they are too noble to shit, but never mind about that, I know the difference. But do you think I'm so old I can't remember? I'm 90 and I remember very well. I remember what to do with a woman too. That wife will give me a son by this time next year, or a daughter, that can't be helped. Boy or girl it will be red wrinkled and squalling, and like as not, she'll want to name it Walder or Walder. Benjen gritted his teeth. By all the sacred trees. Does this pruned Andal ever shut up? He asked himself silently. Jon Arryn was going to foster his son with Lord Stannis, you're quite certain? Catelyn asked. Yes, yes, yes. Only he died, so what does it matter? You say you want to cross the river. We do. Benjen said sternly, tired of the old man's endless ramblings. Well, you can't, Lord Walder announced crisply. Not unless I allow it. And why should I? The Tullys and the Starks have never been friends of mine. He pushed himself back in his chair and crossed his arms, smirking, waiting for her answer. The rest was only haggling, though not only between Lord Walder and Catelyn, for Benjen made his voice heard and at times would even clash with one another while Lord Walder picked earwax out of his ears, but eventually, a compromise was met. A swollen red sun hung low against the western hills when the gates of the castle opened, the drawbridge creaked down, the portcullis winched up, and Lady Catelyn and Benjen rode forward to rejoin Robb and his lord's bannermen. Behind them came Sir Jared Frey, Sir Hosteen Frey, Sir Danwell Frey and Lord Walder's bastard son Sir Ronal Rivers, leading a long column of pikesmen rank on rank of shuffling men in blue steel ringmail and silvery grey cloaks. Robb galloped out to meet them with Grey Wind racing beside the stallion. It's done, Benjen declared. Lord Walder will grant you your crossing, his swords are yours as well, lest 400 he means to keep back to hold the twins. I suggest you leave 400 of your own, a mixed force of archers and swordsmen. He can scarcely object to an offering to augment his garrison, but make certain you give the command to a man you can trust, said Caitlin. If you wish to proceed with my suggested action, she quickly added after exchanging looks with Benjen. Lord Walder may need help keeping faith, Benjen added, showing his support for Caitlin's advice, but making sure Rob understood he held the command. A fine idea, mother, I will make it so, Rob answered, gazing at the ranks of pikesmen. Perhaps Sir Helman Tallheart, do you think? Rob suggested. The question is, what do you think? Benjen asked. Rob cleared his throat. Sir Helman Tallheart, Rob repeated more assertively. A fine choice, Caitlin agreed. What did he want of us? Asked Rob. A few agreements were made to solidify our alliance, said Benjen. If you can spare a few of your swords, I need some men to escort 2 of Lord Frey's grandsons north to Winterfell. Lady Caitlin told her son, I have agreed to take them as wards. They are young boys, aged 8 years and 7. It would seem they are both named Walder. Your brother Bran will welcome the companionship of lads near his own age. Is that all? 2 fosterlings. That's a small enough price to. Lord Frey's son Oliver will be coming with us, Caitlin went on. He is to serve as your personal squire. His father would like to see him knighted in good time. A squire, Rob shrugged. Fine. That's fine if his. Lastly, your uncle Benjen and my brother Edmure will each marry Walder Frey's daughters when the fighting has ended and my brother has been rescued. Rob was nonplussed. That is unexpected. Did you agree to this, uncle? Asked Rob. It was the only thing I could think of. Lord Walder and your mother were in the midst of discussing having you and your sister Arya wedded to Lord Walder's children. I could not allow such a decision to be made without your consent, and so I insisted against it and offered myself as an alternative. When Lady Caitlin and I argued, I made a passing remark suggesting sarcastically that she wed off her brother without his consent, which Lord Frey took as an alternative. What if my uncle Edmure is killed before we can save him? Or refuses to honor the pact? Asked Rob. Crossing the twins is the only way we can save him. He will have no choice but to honor it. And if he is killed, Riverrun falls to me as my father's eldest living child and will pass from me to Rickon, since Bran cannot have children of his own. In that case, Rickon will take Edmure's place and wed one of Walder's granddaughters. Rob pondered for a moment before finally speaking. A reasonable compromise, he finally decided. The great northern host crossed at evenfall as a horned moon floated upon the river. The double column wound its way through the gate of the eastern twin like a great steel snake slithering across the courtyard, into the keep and over the bridge to issue forth once more from the second castle on the west bank. Benjen rode at the head of the Serpent, with Rob, Lady Caitlin, Jon, the Blackfish and Sir Stephen Frey. Behind followed 9/10 of their horse, knights, lancers, free riders and mounted bowmen. It took hours for them all to cross. The larger part of the northern host, pikes, archers and great masses of northern warriors with swords, axes, mauls, picks, maces, cudgels and other weapons of northern brutality, on foot, remained on the east bank under the command of Roose Bolton along with 5 giants including Dongo, while the last 3 who were the swiftest and strongest runners of the giants crossed the twins with Rob's host. Of the skin changers, most of the ones that remained with Roose Bolton were ones whose animal companions were bears, boars, stags, shadow cats, foxes, rodents and birds, while Rob's mounted host brought over skin changers mainly comprised of wargs. In the north, wargs were skin changers who could enter the minds of wolves and dogs, but only Starks had ever been able to command the minds of direwolves. Rob had commanded Bolton to continue to march south to confront the huge Lannister army coming north under Lord Tywine. For good or ill, he'd thrown the dice. Chapter 4, Battle on the Green Fork. Chapter text. The blare of trumpets awoke Tyrion from his tender sleep. Shay, the young girl his new man Bronn had gotten to share his bed with him, was shaking him by the shoulder. "Lord," she whispered, "wake up, milord. Something's happening." Groggy, he sat up and threw back the blanket. The horns called through the night, wild and urgent, a cry that said hurry. 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 He heard shouts, the clatter of spears, the whicker of horses, though nothing yet that had spoken to him of fighting. "My lord father's trumpets," he said. "Battle assembly." I thought Stark was yet a day's march away. Shae shook her head lost, her eyes were wide and white. She was a beautiful young woman, no older than 19 perhaps, short dark hair, olive skin and dark eyes. Groaning, Tyrion lurched to his feet and pushed his way outside, shouting for his squire, a boy named Podrick Payne, a skinny boy with straight, thin hair and a thick neck. Quiet, shy, and timid from Tyrion's reckoning when he first met him the previous day, hard to believe he was a relative of Sir Ilyn the Silent Headsman, no matter how distantly related. Wisps of pale fog drifted through the night like long white fingers off the river. Men and horses blundered through the pre-dawn chill, saddles were being cinched, wagons loaded, fires extinguished. The trumpets blew again, hurry! 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 Knights vaulted on 2 snorting coursers while men-at-arms buckled their sword belts as they ran. When he found Pod, the boy was snoring softly. Tyrion gave him a sharp poke in the ribs with his toe. "My armor," he said, "and be quick about it." Bronn came trotting out of the mists. When Tyrion first met Bronn a short while back, he was a sellsword who accompanied Lady Catelyn along with knights of her father's sworn houses to the Eyrie with Tyrion as a prisoner. After some false accusations by Lady Catelyn and her sister Lady Lysa, of murdering Jon Arryn and attempting to kill young Bran Stark, twice, Tyrion called for a trial by combat in which Bronn was good enough to lend his sword. After Bronn killed Lysa's champion, Ser Vardis, the two departed and were set upon by hill tribesmen. Tyrion was able to use his quick wits and words to win over the clansmen by promising them weapons, armor, and glory. By the time Tyrion arrived in the Riverlands and joined his father's host, he'd assembled a small army of mountain clansmen. Bronn was already armored on a horse, wearing his battered half-helm. "Do you know what's happened?" asked Tyrion. "The Stark boy stole the march on us," Bronn said. "He crept down the King's Road in the night and now his host is less than a mile north than here, forming up in battle array. Hurry!" The trumpets called. "Hurry! Hurry! Hurry! See that the clansmen are ready to ride." Tyrion ducked back inside his tent. "Where are my clothes?" he asked Shae, looking around. "There, no, the leather, damn it." "Yes, bring me my boots." By the time he was dressed, his squire had laid out his armor, such as it was. Tyrion owned a fine suit of heavy plate, expertly crafted to fit his misshapen body. Alas, it was safe at Casterly Rock and he was not. He had to make do with oddments assembled from Lord Leford's wagon. Mail hauberk and coif, a dead knight's gorget, lobstered greaves and gauntlets and pointed steel boots. Some of it was ornate, some plain, not a bit of it matched or fit as it should. His breastplate was fit for a bigger man. For his oversized head, they found a huge bucket-shaped great helm topped with a foot-long triangular spike. Shae helped Pod with the buckles and clasps. Tyrion looked to Shae. "If I die, weep for me." "You will be dead, how will you know?" she asked. "I'll know." Tyrion buckled on his belt, heavy with the weight of a short sword and dirk. By then his groom had brought up his mount. A formidable brown courser, armored as heavily as he was. He needed help to mount. He thought he weighed 1,000 stone. Pod handed him up his shield, a massive slab of heavy ironwood banded with steel. Lastly, they gave him his battle axe. Shae stepped back and sized Tyrion up and began to chuckle. "My lord looks fearsome," she said softly. "Your lord looks like a dwarf in mismatched armor," Tyrion answered, feeling stupid as he sat atop his horse, "but I thank you for your kindness. Podrick, should the battle go against us, see the lady safely home." He saluted her with his axe, wheeled his horse about and trotted off. His stomach was a hard knot, so tight it pained him. As Tyrion rode, the sun was barely beginning to crest over the horizon as the servants began striking the tents. The western sky was a deep purple, speckled with stars. Tyrion wondered if it was the last sunrise he would ever see. His father had placed him in the vanguard with the mountain clansmen he'd assembled. They were fierce warriors, war-worshipping barbarians of the old gods of the forest, but so were the Northerners, though they were more disciplined warriors with equal ferocity and the intelligence to use it. Perhaps Tyrion would have been more confident of being placed with the clansman vanguard if he were given the command to use them, but alas, while Tyrion would fight with the vanguard, it would be led by Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides. An oversized brute and the favored attack dog of Tyrion's lord father, but every bit an oaf as he was deadly and only knew how to attack head-on. As Tyrion pondered his fate, he considered if wondering was a form of cowardice. Did his brother Jaime ever contemplate death before a battle? A war horn sounded in the far distance, a deep mournful note that chilled the soul. The clansmen climbed onto their scrawny mountain horses, shouting what sounded like curses and rude jokes in the old tongue. Several appeared to be drunk. The rising sun was burning off the drifting tendrils of fog as Tyrion led them off. What grass the horses had left was heavy with dew, as if some passing god had scattered a bag of diamonds over the earth. The mountain men fell in behind him, each clan arranged behind its own leaders. In the dawn light, the army of Lord Tywin Lannister unfolded like an iron rose, thorns gleaming. Tyrion's uncle, Kevan, would lead the center. Sir Kevan had raised his standard above the King's Road, quivers hanging from their belts. The foot archers arrayed themselves into 3 long lines to east and west of the road and stood calmly stringing their bows. Between them, pikesmen formed squares, behind were rank on rank of men at arms with spear and sword and axe. 300 heavy horse surrounded Sir Kevan and the Lords Bannerman Lefford, Lydon and Seret with all their sworn retainers. The right wing was all cavalry, some 4,000 men, heavy with the weight of their armor. More than 3/4 of the knights were there, massed together like a great steel fist. Sir Adam Marbrand had the command. Tyrion saw his banner unfurl as his standard-bearer took it out, a burning tree, orange in smoke. Behind him flew Sir Flamant Brax's purple unicorn, the brindled boar of Cricket Hall, the bantam rooster of SWYFT and more. His lord father took his place on the hill where he had slept. Around him the reserve assembled, a huge force, half-mounted and half-foot, 5,000 strong. Lord Tywin almost always chose to command the reserve. He would take the high ground and watch the battle unfold below him, commanding his forces when and where they were needed most. Even from afar, his lord father was resplendent. Tywin Lannister's battle armor put his son Jaime's gilded suit to shame. His great cloak was sewn from countless layers of cloth of gold, so heavy that it barely stirred even when he charged, so large that its drape covered most of his stallion's hind quarters when he took the saddle. No ordinary clasp would suffice for such a weight, so the great cloak was held in place by a matched pair of miniature lionesses crouching on his shoulders as if poised to spring. Their mate, a male with a magnificent mane, reclined atop Lord Tywin's great helm, one paw raking the air as he roared. All 3 lions were wrought in gold, with ruby eyes. His armor was heavy steel plate, enameled in a dark crimson, greaves and gauntlets inlaid with ornate gold scrollwork. His rondels were golden sunbursts, all his fastenings were gilded, and the red steel was burnished to such a high sheen that it shone like fire in the light of the rising sun. Tyrion could hear the rumble of the Northmen's drums now. He remembered Robb Stark as he had last seen him, in his father's high seat in the great hall of Winterfell, a sword naked and shining in his hands. He remembered how the direwolves had come at him out of the shadows and suddenly he could see them again snarling and snapping, teeth bared in his face. He remembered Robb's half-brother Jon too. Tyrion liked Jon Snow a great deal and trusted him. When Robb greeted Tyrion with hostility and coldness, Jon took his brother's side, recoiling from Tyrion and looking to him as though he were trying to find some kind of deception Tyrion was playing on him. Jon had a wolf too, a white beast with red eyes called Ghost. When his kin were snarling at Tyrion, Ghost neither defended nor turned on Tyrion, simply looked to the dwarf. Doubtless to say that if Robb Stark was riding to battle then Jon Snow would be by his side, for Jon Snow loved his brother as Tyrion loved his own brother. Would the boys bring their wolves to war with them? The thought made him uneasy. The Northerners would be exhausted after their long sleepless march. Tyrion wondered what the boy had been thinking. Did he think to take them unawares while they slept? Small chance of that. Whatever else might be said of him, Tywin Lannister was no man's fool. The van was massing on the left. He saw the standard first, 3 black dogs on a yellow field. Sir Gregor sat beneath it, mounted on the biggest horse Tyrion had ever seen. Bronn took one look at him and grinned. Always follow a big man into battle. Tyrion threw him a hard look. And why is that? They make such splendid targets, that he'll draw the eyes of every bowman on the field. Laughing, Tyrion regarded the mountain with fresh eyes. I confess I had not considered it in that light. Clegane had no splendor about him. His armor was steel plate, dull grey, scarred by hard use and showing neither sigil nor ornament. He was pointing men into position with his blade, a 2-handed greatsword that Sir Gregor waved about with one hand as a lesser man might wave a dagger. Any man runs, I'll cut him down myself, he was roaring when he caught sight of Tyrion. "Imp! Take the left! Hold the river! If you can! The left of the left, to turn their flank, the Stark would need horses that could run on water." Tyrion led his men toward the riverbank. "Look," he shouted, pointing with his axe. The river. A blanket of pale mist still clung to the surface of the water, the murky green current swirling past underneath. The shallows were muddy and choked with reeds. "That river is ours. Whatever happens, keep close to the water. Never lose sight of it. Let no army come between us and our river. If they dirty our waters, hack off their cocks and feed them to the fishes." Shagga, one of the stone crows of the mountain clans, had an axe in either hand. He smashed them together and made them ring. "Halfman," he shouted. The other stone crows picked up the cry, and the Blackears and Moon Brothers as well. The burned men did not shout, though they rattled their swords and spears. "Halfman! Halfman! Halfman!" Tyrion turned his courser in a circle to look over the field. The ground was rolling and uneven here, soft and muddy near the river, rising in a gentle slope towards the King's Road, stony and broken beyond it to the east. A few trees spotted the hillsides, but most of the land had been cleared and planted. His heart pounded in his chest and timed to the drums, and under his layer of leather and steel, his brow was cold with sweat. He watched Sir Gregor as the mountain rode up and down the line, shouting and gesticulating. This wing too was all cavalry, but where the right was a mailed fist of knights and heavy lancers, the vanguard was made up of the sweepings of the west. Mounted archers and leather jerkins, a swarming mass of undisciplined free riders and sellswords, field hands on plough horses armed with scythes and their fathers' rusted swords, half-trained boys from the stews of Lannisport and Tyrion and his mountain clansmen. Crowfoot Bronn muttered beside him, giving voice to what Tyrion had left unsaid. He could only nod. Had his lord father taken leave of his senses? No pikes, too few bowmen, a bare handful of knights, the ill-armed and unarmored commanded by an unthinking brute who led with his rage. How could his father expect this travesty of a battle to hold his left? He had no time to think about it. The drums were so near that the beat crept under his skin and set his hands to twitching. Bronn drew his longsword, and suddenly the enemy was there before them, boiling over the tops of the hills, advancing with measured tread behind a wall of shields and pikes. Gods be damned, look at them all, Tyrion thought, though he knew his father had more men on the field. Their captains led them on armored war horses, standard bearers riding alongside with their banners, and ahead of their shield walls were a number of animals, bears, shadow cats, stags, foxes, boars and other such animals. Tyrion recalled what Jon had taught him of skin changers, men who could command and enter the minds of beasts. Jon had even demonstrated the ability, going into a trance with his eyes rolling into the back of his head as he entered the mind of his direwolf, Ghost. A vanguard of beasts to lead their army, but what took Tyrion a moment to realize was the shuddering and fearful murmurs of Tyrion's men as they spotted creatures that marched between squares of soldiers were 5 giants, literal giants. Massive hairy creatures ranging between 10 and 13 feet tall, carrying spears and cudgels fashioned from trees. "Mother save me, father save me, warrior, maiden," Smith uttered, a trembling young man upon a horse, calling out to the 7 for protection. The man was armed with a farmer's scythe and dressed in a leather gamison, no older than 25. "Shut your mouth, boy," Clegane commanded. Please, I can't, I'm too young." The boy began to panic and turn his horse, probably planning to flee, but the mountain took his head with one clean swing of his great sword. "Anyone else feel like running?" Clegane asked, looking at the disorganized, poorly armed riders. Tyrion looked once again to the banners at the heads of the formations of Northmen clad in mail, leather, steel nasal helms, fur pelts and every manner of deadly weapon, men of true northern fury. He glimpsed the banners of the bull moose of the Hornwoods, the Karstark Sunburst, Lord Sawin's battle axe, and the mailed fist of the Glovers, and the twin towers of the Freys, blue on grey. So much for his father's certainty that Lord Walder would not bestir himself. The white banner of House Stark was seen everywhere, the grey direwolves seeming to run and leap as the banners swirled and streamed from the high staffs. "Where are the boys?" Tyrion wondered. A war horn blew. "Hari," it cried, its voice as long and low, chilling as a cold wind from the north. The Lannister trumpets answered, the brazen and defiant, yet it seemed to Tyrion that they sounded somehow smaller, more anxious. He could feel a fluttering in his bowels, a queasy liquid feeling. He hoped he was not going to die sick. As the horns died away, a hissing filled the air. A vast flight of arrows arched from the right, where the archers stood flanking the road. The Northerners broke into a run, shouting as they came, their animals bounding ahead of them. But the Lannister arrows fell on them like hail, hundreds of arrows, thousands, and shouts turned to screams as men stumbled and went down while others held their shields up and blocked the arrows. By then a second flight was in the air, and the archers were fitting a third arrow to their bowstrings. Then another chorus of screams emerged, but not from the Northerners. Tyrion turned his head and saw the 3 columns of archers east and west of the King's Road. They had ceased their barrage of arrows and had come under attack by birds. Tyrion could not see them well from the distance, but their caws, hoots and screeches sounded like a mixture of hawks, owls, falcons, eagles, crows and vultures, violently attacking the archers. Some of the archers tried to show the birds off by swinging their bows in the air, others tried to shoot them, but the birds outmaneuvered them with arrows zooming past, one even landing in the grass near one of Kevan's mounted knights. Tyrion could swear he saw 2 birds clutch each end of a bow and take it up while another pecked and clawed at the bowstring. Tyrion had no doubt in his mind, more skin changers. Clawing at the eyes, nipping fingers and shredding bowstrings, incapacitating their archers from attacking the Northmen. Tyrion even spied one archer accidentally slashing another man standing next to him while trying to kill a bird with his dagger. Lord Leo Lefford gave a command and some of the squares of pikesmen that stood between the 2 sets of archers dispersed east and west and tried to poke the birds out of the sky. "No, you fool! No, damn you!" Tyrion thought to himself as their center dispersed and broke formation, leaving the heart of their ranks open to attack. Tyrion's uncle Kevan caught the blunder and started shouting at Lefford and then at the men, ordering them back into formation presumably, but the men shuffled aimlessly and knocked into one another. The birds dispersed and flew higher and seemed to retreat, but the archers were looking blindly to the sky and the pikesmen were in disarray as the Northerners charged them. But Tyrion could not waste his focus on his uncle's forces, for Northerners were charging them as well, now hindered by arrow fire. The trumpets blared again, the daa, the daa, the daa. Sir Gregor waved his huge sword and bellowed a command, and 1,000 other voices screamed back at him. Tyrion put his spurs to his horse and added one more voice to the cacophony, and the van surged forward. "The river," he shouted at his clansmen as they rode. "Remember, hew to the river." He was still leading when they broke a canter, until Chella gave a blood-curdling shriek and galloped past him, and Shagga howled and followed. The clansmen charged after them, leaving Tyrion in their dust. A crescent of enemy spearmen had formed ahead, a double hedgehog bristling with steel, waiting behind tall oaken kite shields marked with the sunburst of Karstark. Several of the charging horses were felled as they approached the Karstark line. The skin changers, bears, shadowcats and boars bring them down as the rest of the cavalry charged past. Gregor Clegane was the first to reach them, leading a wedge of armored veterans. Half the horses shied at the last second, breaking their charge before the row of spears. The others died, sharp steel points ripping through their chests. Tyrion saw a dozen men go down. The mountain stallion reared, lashing out with iron-shod hooves as a barbed spearhead raked across his neck. Maddened, the beast lunged into the ranks. Spears thrust at him from every side, but the shield wall broke beneath his weight. The Northerners stumbled away from the animal's death throes. As his horse fell, snorting blood and biting with his last red breath, the mountain rose untouched, laying about him with his 2-handed greatsword. Shagga went bursting through the gap before the shields could close, other stone crows hard behind him. Tyrion shouted, "Burned men! Moon brothers! After me," but most of them were ahead of him. He glimpsed Tymet, son of Tymet Vold, free as his mount died under him in full stride, saw a moon brother impaled on a Karstark spear, watched Khan's horse shatter a man's ribs with a kick. One of the giants who marched between the shield walls of the left and central flanks came storming towards the mountain's cavalry from the side, waving a large cudgel fashioned from an oak tree, sending the mountain's knights flying through the air and smashing into other knights, knocking them from their horses. No arrows came hailing down, meaning the damage done by the winged skin changers was most likely as effective as the Northerners hoped. As the scraps of poorly armed farm boys and sellswords broke against the Carstarks and the mounted knights under Sir Gregor were pulled from their horses by skin-changer beasts or men wielding swords, axes, mauls, warpicks, spiked maces and cudgels and fell screaming. Only the mountain clansmen seemed to hold their own against the northern warriors, matching their ferocity and challenging their battle cries. The hedgehog was crumbling, the northerners reeling back under the impact of the mounted assault. Tyrion saw Shagger catch a spearman full in the chest as the fool came on at a run, and saw his axe shear through mail and leather and muscle and lungs. The man was dead on his feet, the axe had lodged in his breast, yet Shagger rode on, cleaving a shield in two with his left-hand battle axe while the corpse was bouncing and stumbling bonelessly along on his right. Finally, the dead man slid off. Shagger smashed the two axes together and roared. By then the enemy was on him, and Tyrion's battle shrunk to the few feet of ground around his horse. A man-at-arms thrust at his chest and his axe lashed out, knocking the spear aside. The man danced back for another try, but Tyrion spurred his horse and rode right over him. Bronn was surrounded by three foes, but he lopped the head off the first spear that came at him and raked his blade across a second man's face on his backslash. A thrown spear came hurtling at Tyrion from the left and lodged in his shield with a woody chunk. He wheeled and raced after the thrower, but the man raised his own shield over his head. Tyrion circled around him, raining axe blows down on the wood. Chips of oak went flying until the northerner lost his feet and slipped, failing flat on his back with his shield on top of him. He was below the reach of Tyrion's axe and it was too much bother to dismount, so he left him there and rode after another man, taking him from behind with a sweeping down cut that sent a jolt of impact up his arm. That won him a moment's respite. Reining up, he looked for the river. There it was, off to the right. Somehow he had gotten turned around. A burned man rode past, slumped against his horse. A spear had entered his belly and come out through his back. He was past any help, but when Tyrion saw one of the northerners run up and make a grab for his reins, he charged. His quarry met him sword in hand. He was tall and spare, wearing a long chainmail hauberk and gauntlets of lobstered steel, but he'd lost his helm and blood ran down into his eyes from a gash across his forehead. Tyrion aimed a swipe at his face, but the tall man slammed it aside. "Dwarf!" he screamed. "Die!" He turned in a circle as Tyrion rode around him, hacking at his head and shoulders. Steel rang on steel, and Tyrion soon realized that the tall man was quicker and stronger than he was. Where in the seven hells was Bronn? "Die!" the man grunted, chopping at him savagely. Tyrion barely got his shield up in time, and the wood seemed to explode inward under the force of the blow. The shattered pieces fell away from his arm. "Die!" the swordsman bellowed, shoving in close and wanging Tyrion across the temple so hard his head rang. The blade made a hideous scraping sound as he drew it back over the steel. The tall man grinned, until Tyrion's dystria bit, quick as a snake, laying his cheek bare to the bone. Then he screamed. Tyrion buried his axe in his head. "You die," he told him, and he did. As he wrenched the blade free, he heard a shout. "Eddard!" a voice rang out. "For Eddard and Winterfell!" The northern warrior came thundering down on him, swinging the spiked ball of a morning star around his head. Then by a stroke of luck, a body went hurling towards him and knocked the man from his horse, clearly one of Gregor's mounted knights accidentally launched at the Stark rider by the giant. As the battle raged around him, Tyrion looked to the east, to see what was going on with the rest of the battle. The loss of their archers and the confusion caused by the blunders of Leford had left the center in disarray and the northerners pressed hard against the center with Tyrion's father Lord Tywine having joined the fray to reinforce the center and the east flank to hold against the northern advance. Only Tyrion's mountain clansmen and the mountain's knights seemed to be holding out against the northern advance, so much so that the central and eastern units of the north had overshot them. If it weren't for the giant blocking their way, they could hit the central northern force and break their advance. "The left leg!" Tyrion shouted. "Left! Left! The left leg! Bring him down! Bring him down!" Tyrion shouted to all who would listen. Some of the poorly armored riders and archers that remained heard him and looked to the giant as Tyrion rode forward. The clansmen heard their half-man too and understood what he meant. As Tyrion led the charge, he was once again overshot as clansmen, pikesmen, sellswords and archers passed him by and threw their axes and pikes and fired arrows from atop their horses at the left leg of a giant. By the time they were done, the giant screamed in pain as the fur on its leg went red with blood and became bristled with pike ends and arrows. When it tried to step forward, it lost its balance and came crashing down on its left side, falling on the Karstark men, flattening a fair number of them underneath and breaking their ranks. The Karstarks began to rout and turned to retreat. Clegane's horsemen and the clansmen wished to pursue, but Tyrion shouted out to them. No. No. Leave them. East. Drive east. Take them at the hip. Break the advance. Those who listened informed the others, and Shagga and Bronn emerged out of the chaos, rallying the men and driving them like a herd of sheep into a pasture, seeming to have seen Tyrion before he saw them. Tyrion felt exhilarated, the thrill of the battle, so sure his flanking maneuver would work. Tyrion kicked his spurs at his horse's hips and rode forward, axe in hand. It seemed the mountain had latched on to Tyrion's advance and as usual beat Tyrion to the battle, leading his mounted knights into the advancing Northmen, who were all focused on the battle ahead of them. Tyrion came riding over a field of bodies paved by the horsemen ahead of him. He saw a Stark warrior with an axe and a round shield. Tyrion swung his axe and took his head while he wasn't looking. Next, a swordsman saw Tyrion coming but swung his blade too soon and was struck down by the dwarf, a spurt of his blood decorating the side of Tyrion's courser as his throat opened up. The other 4 giants were still standing. Some had a few spears sticking out of them, no more than skin deep, each swinging their spears and maces at the rows of Lannister men. The western vanguard cut the northern center in half and came descending down on the Northmen engaged with Tyrion's father and uncle from behind. One of the 4 remaining giants was at the head of the northern center. It seemed to have lost its weapon and was instead using a dead armored horse gripped by the legs as some kind of flail. The giant seemed to have marched beyond the northern host and was at the center of the Lannister force. As Tyrion rode further down towards his father's host, cleaving a couple Northmen now and again, he saw rows of Lannister pikes drive up from all sides and skewer the giant. The giant wailed in pain and then toppled to the ground, falling forward on the pikesmen and some cavalry. As Tyrion came riding down with his clansmen's advance, he noticed a particular horse, a white stallion in exquisite armor, gilded, and its bardings were shimmering crimson silk emblazoned with the Lion of Lannister. The last time Tyrion saw the horse, his father was mounted on top of it. Now the horse was lying dead with something or someone pinned beneath it. Father, Tyrion thought. The dwarf rode hard, running through or cleaving any Northman who tried to pick a fight with him. An injured Northman in mail and studded leather, with a steel helm and a fur pelt over his shoulders, came limping towards the horse, Lord Tywine now clearly visible, his legs pinned beneath his slain stallion. The Northman knocked Tywine's sword away with his axe and lifted the weapon with one hand above his head. But through the chaos Tyrion came charging and swung his axe, taking another head and saving his father. Lord Tywine lifted his gilded visor, revealing a smudge of blood coming down from his lips to his chin. Tyrion, he called out as he spluttered and coughed. Shagga came raging across the battlefield, hacking and slashing and screaming with Bronn close behind. Bronn. Shagga. To me. To me now. Tyrion shouted. The 2 came riding towards him and saw Tyrion's lord father pinned under the horse. The 3 dismounted while other clansmen circled them, fending off any Northmen who tried to attack. Shagga and Bronn lifted the horse while Tyrion did his best to drag his father out from underneath, but in truth his father did most of the work, Tywine kicking his legs out and pushing against the grass under his feet, grunting in pain as he was pulled out. Bronn took Tywine by the arm and helped him to his feet as Tyrion brought his horse to his father to ride to safety. War horns blew and the Lannisters charged forward, cheering and rallying to battle. The central host of Northmen was routed and the east followed them. Even the giants and the skin-changer animals went running over the hill while the Lannisters pursued. The battle seemed to have been won. As the Lannisters chased down the northern host in retreat, Tyrion made no attempt to join the slaughter. He, Shagga and Bronn went looking for his men, taking another horse after his father retreated atop Tyrion's own. Many he found among the dead. Ulf son of Umar lay in a pool of congealing blood, his arm gone at the elbow. A dozen of his moon brothers sprawled around him. Shagga dismounted when he found Conn's body among the slain. They have killed Conn son of Corrot. Handsome Conn had no mark but for the red stain over his breast, where the spear thrust had killed him. Chella daughter of Sheik rode up as Shagga closed Conn's eyes and said a prayer to Skarn, the war god. Tymet, they discovered looting the bodies of the slain with his burned men. Of the 300 clansmen who had ridden to battle behind Tyrion Lannister, perhaps half had survived. He left the living to look after the dead and went alone in search of his father. First, he checked the camp where the Maestas were, but the Maestas had already tended to him after the battle ended and he'd gone off on Tyrion's horse to the river. It was at the river that Tyrion found his father, sipping wine from a jeweled cup as his squire undid the fastenings on his breastplate. "A fine victory," Sir Kevan said when he saw Tyrion. "Your wild men fought well." His father's eyes were on him, pale green flecked with gold, so cool they gave Tyrion a chill. "Better than well," Tywine corrected his brother. "If it hadn't been for Tyrion's men, we might have lost the battle." Tywine's tone was still calm and collected, not showing much praise but rather an acknowledgement of Tyrion's actions. "Did that surprise you, father?" he asked. "Did it upset your plans? We were supposed to be butchered, were we not?" Lord Tywine drained his cup, his face expressionless. "I put the least disciplined men on the left, yes. I anticipated that they would break. Robb Stark is a green boy, more like to be brave than wise. I'd hoped that if he saw our left collapse, he might plunge into the gap, eager for a rout. Once he was fully committed, Sir Kevan's pikes would wheel and take him in the flank, driving him into the river while I brought up the reserve. And you thought it best to place me in the midst of this carnage, yet keep me ignorant of your plans." "A feigned rout is less convincing," his father said, "and I am not inclined to trust my plans to a man who consorts with sellswords and savages. But it was your sellswords and savages that held against the northern host as mine was crumbling. The Northmen resorted to their vile sorcery of animal mastery to destroy our archers. Then that witless fool Leoleford ordered my own vanguard to disperse to fight those damn birds. If he were common born, I would have him flogged," Kevan declared with a grunt. "I'd want to be the first one to hold the whip," Tyrion commented with a smirk. Tyrion pulled off his steel gauntlet and let it fall to the ground, wincing as he felt pain in his arm. Tyrion looked down and saw a deep cut in his arm. When he received it he was not sure, the blood down on his fingers was already dry. "The Stark boy proved more cautious than I expected for one of his years," Lord Tywine admitted, "but a victory is a victory, in large part thanks to you, I must say. You're wounded." For a moment Tywine's eyes lingered on Tyrion's arm with what seemed like concern. Tyrion looked down at his right arm, soaked with blood. "Good of you to notice, father," he said with a light-hearted laugh trailing off the end of his sentence, trying to feign strength, though the pain was truly harsh. "Might I trouble you to send for your Maestas? Unless you relish the notion of having a one-armed dwarf for a son. Squire. Fetch the Maestas now," Tywine commanded sternly to the young man standing next to him. Tyrion was surprised how concerned his father was. It seemed strange to Tyrion, who had never seen more emotion from his father than when he was scolding him. Tywine looked first to his brother Sir Kevan, then back to Tyrion, and then the Lord of Casterly Rock looked to the ground and cleared his throat. "Tyrion," he began in a firm tone, but it seemed similar to the one he used with Jaime when he was trying to speak softly, in his own way. "In battle when I was pinned under my horse, you—" An urgent shout of Lord Tywine turned his father's head before he could continue. Tywine Lannister rose to his feet as Sir Adam Marbrand leapt down off his courser. The horse was lathered and bleeding from the mouth. Sir Adam dropped to one knee, a rangy man with dark copper hair that fell to his shoulders, armored in burnished bronzed steel with the fiery tree of his house etched black on his breastplate. "My liege, we have taken some of their commanders. Sir Willis Marndaly, Harry on Karstark and 4 Freys. I fear Roose Bolton, Lord Hornwood and Lord Sewin have escaped us." "And the boy?" Lord Tywine asked. Sir Adam hesitated. "The Stark boy was not with them, my lord. They say he crossed at the Twins with the great part of his horse, riding hard for Riverrun." Tyrion's heart fluttered and he looked to his father, whose eyes flared as the two silently shared the same thought. Jaime. Chapter 5, The Whispering Wood. Chapter text. Jon recalled once when he was younger his father told him, Robb and Theon, that on the eve of battle to do 3 things: say a prayer to the gods, check your armor and weapons twice over, and lastly and most importantly, shit and piss while you have the chance. Jon remembered the 3 of them laughing when they heard Lord Stark say it, But he found himself going through all 3 steps before they rode out, and thanked the gods he did, because John felt if he had anything in him to shit or piss, he'd be releasing it. Moonlight winked on the tumbling waters of the stream below as it wound its rocky way along the floor of the valley. Beneath the trees, war horses whickered softly and pawed at the moist, leafy ground, while men made nervous jests in hushed voices. John sat mounted upon a dark brown courser, unarmored save for a leather chafron buckled to the horse's bridle. He was positioned upon a hill just behind the tree line of the wood on the left bank of the rocky stream that ran through it. To John's left was Rob, who sat upon his armored grey stallion, fully armored, his shield strapped to his arm and wearing a great bassinet modelled with canine ears, and the visor was moulded in the shape of a wolf's snout extending out with eye slits and breathing holes. Before they rode out, Rob had haggled with his mother on how many men would remain with her to keep her safe as she watched the battle from a nearby hill and escort her north if the battle went against them. Rob wanted 50, but Lady Caitlin, who wished for every available sword to guard her son, wished for only 10, and they settled on 30, with neither being very happy. But Lady Caitlin had also insisted that Rob be guarded as well, and the Lords Bannerman agreed. Many of their sons had clamoured for the honour of riding with the young wolf, as they had taken to calling him. John and Theon insisted they'd be part of Rob's battle guard before any others, to which Rob happily agreed, pulling the 2 in and slinging his arms around their shoulders. Well, this should be exciting, Snow Theon had said to him before they headed out. We ride to battle, Greyjoy, not Attorney John cautioned him, though John's words fell deaf upon Theon's ears. Torren Karstark and his brother Eddard were among Rob's 30, and Patrek Mallister, Small Number, Darren Hornwood, no less than 5 of Walder Frey's vast brood, including Rob's squire Oliver, Lord Walder's son, 2 years older than Rob, and 10 years younger and more anxious. Also among them were some older men like Sir Wendell Marndaly and Robin Flint. One of his companions was even a woman, Daisy Mormont, the old Beargier Mormont's niece and second in line to be Lady of Bear Island after her mother Mage the She-Bear, a lanky 6-footer who had been given a Morning Star at an age, a true northern spearwife. She reminded John of Arya in a way, who wished for nothing more than to be a spearwife and fight in battle alongside her brothers. Rob's battle guard waited in silence along the tree line of the woods, waiting for the Kingslayer, the gilded knight who men said had never learned to wait at all. The Kingslayer is restless and quick to anger, her uncle Brynden had told Rob. And he had wagered their lives and their best hope of victory on the truth of what he said. If Rob was frightened, he gave no sign of it. Before riding for the wood, John watched his brother as he moved among the men, touching one on the shoulder, sharing a jest with another and helping a third to gentle an anxious horse. His armor clinked softly when he moved. Where are they? John wondered. Could the Blackfish have been wrong? So much rested on the truth of what he had told them. Rob had given the Blackfish 300 picked men and sent them ahead to screen his march. Jaime does not know, Sir Brynden said when he rode back. I'll stake my life on that. No bird has reached him, my archers have seen to that. We've seen a few of his outriders, but those that saw us did not live to tell of it. He ought to have sent out more. He does not know. How large is his host? Rob asked. 12,000 foot, scattered around the castle in 3 separate camps, with the rivers between, the Blackfish said. There is no other way to besiege Riverrun, yet still, that will be their undoing. 2 or 3,000 horse. The Kingslayer has us 3 to 1, said Galbart Glover. True enough, Sir Brynden said, yet there is one thing Sir Jaime lacks. Yes? Rob asked. Patience. Their host was greater than it had been when they left the twins. Lord Jason Mallister had brought his power out from Seaguard to join them as they swept around the headwaters of the Blue Fork and galloped south, and others had crept forth as well, hedge knights and small lords and masterless men-at-arms who had fled north when the Lady Catelyn's brother Edmure's army was shattered beneath the walls of Riverrun. They had driven their horses as hard as they dared to reach this place before Jaime Lannister had word of their coming, and now the hour was at hand. It was dark among the trees, where the moon did not reach. John could see no trace of the other Northmen hidden in the tree line across the stream. John was with his brother when he rode down the line and passed his men. Father says you should let the men see you before a battle, Rob said to his mother when he left to visit his troops. It will give them courage, he said. A bird called faintly in the distance, a high sharp trill that rather than startling him, brought calming memories to him. He knew their call well enough, from growing up at Winterfell. Snow shrikes. Sometimes they could be seen in the deep of days of snow when the godswood was white and still. Another bird answered, a third, a fourth, and the feeling of home was overcome by suspense and anxiety, for the growing number of bird sounds meant something was on its way. And so it begins, John thought as his stomach turned and his heart began to thump beneath his black boiled leather cuirass netted with ringmail. "They are coming," my Lord Eddard Carstark whispered. "Scan watch over us," Daisy Mormont uttered in a last-second prayer to their war god. Then the woods went silent, no clinking of spear or armor, no nervous muttering. Grey Wind, who was by Rob's side, was as silent as Ghost was next to John. The gentle rustle of the trees and whistle of the snow shrikes was all there was. The great mounted northern host, Freys, Mallisters, 50 Vale Knights and the last remnants of Edmure Tully's host were all so silent as though they were all holding their breaths. In the quiet John could hear them, far off yet moving closer, the tread of many horses, the rattle of swords and spears and armor, the murmur of human voices, with here a laugh, and there a curse. The rumble of the horses' gallop came from the south to the right of where Rob's battle guard was positioned. The sounds grew louder. John heard more laughter, a shouted command, splashing as they crossed and recrossed the little stream. A horse snorted. A man swore. And then at last John could see them coming into view, galloping down the rocky stream in the narrow valley that passed between the two sides of the dark and shadowy wood. The Lannister host with their fluttering red banners marked with the rampant gold lion. Shiny Westerman knights with decorated armor and the colors of their houses, feathered atop their helmets, painted on their breastplates, woven in their surcoats or worn by their horses. At the head of the host, John could see him, and suddenly he could feel his blood pulsing through the veins of his throat beneath his visored bassinet. Even at a distance, Sir Jaime Lannister was unmistakable. The moonlight had silvered his armor and the gold of his hair and turned his crimson cloak to black. He was not wearing a helm. He is no man for sitting in a tent while his carpenters build siege towers, Sir Brynden had promised. He has ridden out with his knights thrice already, to chase down raiders or storm a stubborn holdfast. Nodding, Robb had studied the map his great-uncle had drawn him. Ned had taught him to read maps. "Raid him here," he said, pointing. "A few hundred men, no more. Tully banners. When he comes after you, we will be waiting." His finger moved an inch to the left here. Here was a hush in the night, moonlight and shadows, a thick carpet of dead leaves underfoot, densely wooded ridges sloping gently down to the stream bed, the underbrush thinning as the ground fell away. John heard his brother's steel pauldrons clink against the mail he wore under his leather cuirass as he turned his head and looked back to the hill where his mother sat mounted, Horlis Mollin by her side, leading the 30 guards assigned to protect her. Robb lifted his sword in salute to his mother, like a farewell of sorts if the battle should go against them. Then came the call of Joe Mormont's war horn, a long low blast that rolled down the valley from the east, to tell them that the last of Jaime's riders had entered the trap. And Grey Wind threw back his head and howled, followed by Ghost, then all the dogs and wolves of the mounted wargs in the army, scattered throughout the tree line. Came the answer from the far ridge as the great Jon winded his own horn. To east and west, the trumpets of the Mallisters and Freys blew vengeance. North, where the valley narrowed and bent like a cocked elbow, Lord Carstark's war horns added their own deep, mournful voices to the dark chorus. Men were shouting and horses rearing in the stream below. The whispering wood let out its breath all at once, as the bowmen Robb had hidden in the branches of the trees let fly their arrows, and the night erupted with the screams of men and horses. The horses turned and splashed their hoofs in the stream and reared as arrows came flying out of the woods. Suddenly John could see the gleaming sharpened steel points of the lances emerge from the shadow of the tree line adjacent to them. As the next barrage of arrows took flight, with his sword raised, Robb shouted a great bellowing war cry, "Winterfell!" The battle guard cracked their reins, John too. They began to trot out of the tree line, but the trot turned into a gallop as they went downhill into the valley, and within a moment Robb was leading a charge with the battle guard calling out, with Grey Wind and Ghost bounding ahead of them. Out of the dark of the tree line from both sides, Northmen, Valiman and Rivermen rode into the valley, swarming around Jaime's column of riders with a vanguard of wolves and big dogs. Two of their giants came up from the south, emerging from either side of the wood, and the last one came down from the north with the Carstarks where the valley was narrowest, trapping the Lannister host between them. Ghost and Grey Wind leapt up and each snatched an outrider from his horse, sinking their teeth into their kill. John hesitated for a moment but did not break his charge. How would he pick an opponent? Who would he fight? Instinct overtook Jon and he raised his sword and slashed a Lannister outrider, and just like that he was dead, Jon's first kill. There was no time to think of it, only to pick another and slash him down with his sword, and another and another. By Jon's fourth opponent, he faced a knight in silver armor inlaid with amethysts and a striped purple and silver cloak. His shield bore a unicorn sigil, and a spiral horn 2 feet long jutted up from the brow of his horsehead helm, a knight of House Brax. The knight slashed his sword and met Jon's. The two slashed at one another with their swords clinking as they met between their horses. As the Brax knight pulled back his arm to take another swing, Jon kicked his spurs into his courser, driving him forward, and ducked his head as the Brax knight swung at his head with the blade swinging past over Jon's helm. Jon then quickly lifted his head, now positioned side by side with the Brax knight, and drove his sword through the armhole of his breastplate beneath the armpit. When Jon drew the sword from the knight's torso, he fell from his saddle and was carried off as his horse bolted with the knight's foot caught in one of the stirrups. The battle echoed around Jon. The crack of a broken lance, the clash of swords, the cries of Lannister and Winterfell and Tully. Riverrun and Tully. Hoofbeats, iron boots splashing in shallow water, the woody sound of swords on oaken shields and the scrape of steel against steel, the hiss of arrows, the thunder of drums, the terrified screaming of 1,000 horses. Men shouted curses and begged for mercy. Jon continued to slash and strike, killing some and blocking others as he moved on to a new opponent, getting separated from a few of his passing enemies in the chaos. After felling another knight, Jon spied the Kingslayer across the battlefield. He sat still atop his horse in the shallow rocky stream, staring intently at something past Jon. Jon followed the Kingslayer's gaze across the battlefield and saw Robb striking down a Lannister man who had fallen from his horse. The Kingslayer meant to kill Robb. Fear and anger welled up within Jon. He would not let his brother be taken. Sir Jaime cracked his reins and charged forward with his sword raised, his eyes still fixed on Robb, who remained unsuspecting of Sir Jaime's approach. Jon rode forward to meet the Kingslayer in battle, but a dismounted Lannister man blindly walked in front of Jon's horse and Jon's courser crashed and fell. Jon was launched from his saddle and landed on the ground, his head clashing against the inside of his bassinet, his ears beginning to ring. Jon ripped the buckles of his helmet with all his might and pulled his head free of the helm. Jon staggered to his feet, stumbling before rising. As the ringing died down and his eyes began to focus, Jon checked his surroundings. His horse was dead, his sword was close by, and he quickly scooped it off the ground. Robb was still engaged with Lannister men, completely unaware of Jaime Lannister advancing towards him, slashing his sword and cutting down Northmen. Jon pushed forward, striking his way through Lannister men both on foot and on horse as he tried to make his way to the Kingslayer. Jon could not see his uncle Benjen, nor the Blackfish, nor the Great Jon, nor anyone who could intercept the Kingslayer. As Jaime charged Robb's battle guard, Darin Hornwood, who was among Robb's chosen companions, saw the Kingslayer and went to meet him in battle. The Karstark sons Eddard and Torrhen pulled their horses about, readying to follow Darin. Darin rode hard, roaring and wielding his axe that he had tried to cleave Jon with at Moat Cailin. The Kingslayer swung his sword, once to parry away Darin's axe and again to strike him dead, splitting his skull. Darin Hornwood fell from his horse, lifeless. The Kingslayer rode on, galloping in his gilded armor towards the Karstark brothers, but the Kingslayer's gallop was broken as a large war horse crashed into his, sending both riders to the ground. It took a moment for Jon to recognize the warrior as he clambered to his feet to face the Kingslayer, a tall strong man with a shaggy white beard hanging from beneath his nasal helm adorned with an eye guard, wearing splint armor and a fur pelt over his shoulders and a hand and a half a sword in his grip, Lord Jeor Mormont, the Old Bear. Jon pushed his way towards Jaime Lannister, striking down any Lannister men who got in his way. When Jon's eyes caught the Old Bear and the Kingslayer again, the two were crossing swords. The Karstark brothers were unable to help, having each been intercepted by two other mounted knights. Jon's attention was then again consumed by another opponent that Jon struck down. By the time Jon reached the Kingslayer, he was standing over Jeor Mormont, who lay on the ground, defeated in single combat. As Jaime Lannister raised his sword, Jon called out as loud as he could, "Kingslayer!" The Lannister turned to Jon and grinned, pointing his blade at Jon as though he were picking Jon as his opponent. Jon approached the Kingslayer, his sword point up, while Jaime Lannister seemed to swagger towards Jon. Jon made a few strikes, easily parried off by Sir Jaime. Jaime's strikes at Jon seemed insincere, like he was toying with him. Jaime tilted his head and smirked. "Stark's bastard. I remember you," the Kingslayer teased. Filled with anger, Jon gave his best roar and struck wildly at the Kingslayer. As Jon's arms began to tire and his strikes began to slow, the Kingslayer fainted low and came in, striking Jon on the temple with the pommel of his sword. Jon then went flying forward as Jaime grabbed him by the neck and shoved him across the battlefield, losing his sword and tumbling to the ground near Lord Mormont. Jon tried to crawl to his feet, but the weight of his armor seemed to pull him down. "Is that the best you can do? Your little brother fell much further when I pushed him and he survived, if you can call it that," the Kingslayer chided. Jon's heart sunk to his stomach, as an image of Bran lying in his bed, eyes closed, appeared in front of him. "Please don't die, Bran," Jon had said. Not Tyrion, but Jaime. It was Jaime all along. Jon's blood boiled, his heart thumped like a galloping stallion. He felt the rage of a direwolf, the kind when he watched into ghost and sunk his teeth into a stag. Jon spotted the old bear's hand and a half a sword just beyond him. Jon reached out and took up the sword, swinging against the Kingslayer, who seemed arrogantly intrigued by Jon's newfound spirit. Jon could taste his own blood in his mouth, drawn either from the fall or from the Kingslayer's blow. Jon struck, stabbed and swung the blade, clashing with Jaime Lannister. At first, the Kingslayer continued toying with Jon, but then became more concerned as Jon's strikes became heavier and harder for him to block. Jon wasn't sure how, but he managed to topple the Kingslayer. Perhaps he tripped over something, a rock perhaps, or slipped in the mud. Whatever had happened, the Kingslayer was on the ground and Jon was slashing his sword down on him as he held his blade up, shielding himself from Jon's attacks. After the fifth or sixth continuous hack, Jon changed his strike to a horizontal swing and cleaved the dazed Kingslayer's hand from his wrist. The Kingslayer looked at the bleeding stump and began to scream in horror, but Jon did not reprieve, smashing the steel pommel against the Kingslayer's head. Jon was not sure what happened next, but in the end, Eddard and Torrhen Karstark had to pull him away from Sir Jaime, one man on either arm. The Kingslayer lay on the ground half unconscious, his sword 6 feet away with his gauntlet hand still gripped around it. "Jon, enough," Eddard was shouting, "he's down, you disarmed him." "Enough? No. Not enough. Never enough." Jon let his sword drop. It took Jon a moment to realize that the sound of battle was fading fast. The Northern Army was standing on a field of victory, rounding up the surrendering Lannister men and knights. As a red dawn broke in the east, Grey Wind, Ghost and the wolves of the walks began to howl again, followed by cheers of victory from the army. Robb came trudging across the battlefield, his grey stallion nowhere in sight, perhaps slain. The wolf's head on his shield was slashed half to pieces, rawwood showing where deep gouges had been hacked in the oak, but Robb himself seemed unhurt. "Jon," he called out, his helm discarded at some point in the battle. The two brothers embraced and wrapped their arms around one another, the plate of their pauldrons and gauntlets and the ring mail woven to their leather cuirasses clinking as they came together. As they pulled away from one another, Robb's eyes turned to the Kingslayer, his left eye swollen shut, blood streaming from his nose and lips and a gash on his forehead from having been struck repeatedly by Jon with the pommel of Lord Mormont's sword. "Jon, did you?" Robb's face curled into a smile. "He did, my lord." The Kingslayer was on the ground with his sword raised when Jon took his hand, Torrhen Karstark declared, singing Jon's praises. Robb hadn't even noticed that the Kingslayer was missing a hand. Robb began to laugh and shake his brother by the shoulder in congratulations, but Jon remained stern. "It was him," Jon declared seriously, "he pushed Bran from the tower. He admitted it to me, gloated about it." The smile slipped off Robb's face. "He's the one who tried to kill Bran?" Theon asked, his face full of horror as he approached. Robb's grip on his sword tightened as he paced towards Jaime Lannister while he lay barely conscious on the ground. "Let's kill him now. Make him pay," Theon suggested. "No. Don't kill him. Put him in chains." "A hostage," the Blackfish declared as he came into view, his sword red and black with blood. Benjen, the Great Jon and a few other lords began gathering around them, some on foot and some on horseback. "He was the one who tried to kill Bran. He killed Jory and the others. His family took Lord Stark and your sisters," Theon protested. Jon looked across the battlefield. Darin Hornwood lay where he fell and the old bear Jeor Mormont was being helped to his feet by his sister Mage and his niece Darcy, dazed and bleeding from the brow, more grief brought by the Kingslayer. Robb. The Lannisters still have Ed Muir. They still have your father and your sisters, we need him, the Blackfish pleaded. After a moment Benjen nodded in agreement. A hostage. More lords made their voices known, a hostage, they all agreed. Robb stood for a moment, his eyes fixed with rage upon the Kingslayer, wishing to do nothing more than hack him to pieces, but Robb relented. Bind him and stop the bleeding from his sword arm. Robb commanded, not at all pleased with letting the Kingslayer live, let alone assuring he stayed alive. Horses were brought for the lords. Robb mounted a piebald gelding to replace his stallion, and Jon climbed a chestnut charger to replace his courser. Robb then led them out of the Whispering Wood to the hill where Lady Catelyn waited. Lady Catelyn was overjoyed to see her son, tears streaming down her face. A mob of men followed them up the slope, dirty and dented and grinning, with Theon and the Great Jon at their head. Between them, they dragged Sir Jaime Lannister, who had regained consciousness and the stump of his sword arm now swaddled in cloth from a Westerman's banner. They threw him down in front of Lady Catelyn's horse. The Kingslayer Horlys Mollin announced, unnecessarily. Lannister raised his head. Lady Stark, he said from his knees. His face swollen and purple and mixed with blood from the gash on his brow from Jon's strikes, but the pale light of dawn had put the glint of gold back in his hair. I would offer you my sword, but I seem to have mislaid it, along with something else, he said, looking down in despair at his missing hand. It is not your sword or your hand I want, so she told him. Give me my father and my brother Ed Muir. Give me my daughters. Give me my lord husband. I have mislaid them as well, I fear. A pity, Catelyn said coldly. Are you going to tell her? Asked Theon, looking at Robb. Robb glanced at Theon and then back to the vexed Lady Catelyn and finally set his eyes on the Kingslayer. You pushed my brother Bran from the tower, didn't you? Robb asked. The Kingslayer knelt in silence, seemingly trying to grin, though it came out wrong and ugly in his puffy, bruised and blooded face. Your brother was sticking his nose where it didn't belong. I mean, who the fuck climbs on the wall of a tower? Horror overcame Catelyn's face and more tears welled up in her eyes, but her new tears were not ones of joy but rather despair. Kill him, Robb, Theon Greyjoy urged. Take his head off. No, Robb answered, peeling off his blood-covered gauntlet. The Blackfish and Uncle Benjen are right. He's more use alive than dead. And my lord father never condoned the murder of prisoners after a battle. A wise man, Jaime Lannister said, and honorable. Take him away and put him in irons, Catelyn said. Do as my lady mother says, Robb commanded. The Kingslayer was dragged off by two of Catelyn's guards who dismounted their horses. Who did we lose? Robb asked, looking around to his lords and Vale Knights. Minimal casualties, my lord, less than 200 I'd wager, Galbart Glover declared. Darin Hornwood went down, the Kingslayer opened his skull, Eddard Karstark declared. Gia Mormont was wounded but lives yet, his sister and niece are tending to him, the Great Jon declared. The Kingslayer was riding for me. He wanted to kill me and Darin died protecting me, Robb said solemnly. I should then be mourning in place of Lord Hornwood if he still lives, Lady Catelyn said. Your men did what they were sworn to do, Robb. They died protecting their liege lord. Grieve for them. Honor them for their valor. But not now. You have no time for grief. You may have lopped the head off the snake, but 3/4 of the body is still coiled around my father's castle. We have won a battle, not a war. But such a battle, said Theon Greyjoy eagerly. My lady, the realm has not seen such a victory since the Field of Fire. I vow the Lannisters lost 10 men for every one of ours that fell. I saw Jon slay Sir Tytos Brax across the field, Theon declared, giving a name to the Brax knight Jon had slain. We've taken close to 100 knights captive, and a dozen lords bannermen. Lord Westerling, Lord Banefort, Sir Garth Greenfield, Lord Istron, Morla the Dornishman, and 3 Lannisters besides Jaime, Lord Tywin's own nephews, 2 of his sister's sons and 1 of his dead brothers. And Lord Tywin. Catelyn interrupted. Have you perchance taken Lord Tywin, Theon? No, Theon answered, brought up short. Until you do, this war is far from done. Robb raised his head and pushed his hair back out of his eyes. My mother is right. We still have Riverrun. Chapter 6, Battle of the Camps. Chapter text. The northern host pressed on through the day towards Riverrun, setting up camp a fair distance away where the smoke of their campfire could not be seen. The rest of the day, men caught up on sleep and tended to their wounds, minimal as most of them were. The Westermen who besieged Riverrun would not think to send outriders after them, for they probably thought Sir Jaime was still marching north, chasing down the Blackfish and his riders. Rob's mother insisted he be checked by the healers, despite bearing no wounds of significance, but indulged her before joining his lords and battle guard. Each of them was restricted to no more than half a cup of ale, for their battle was not yet over. Rob did not linger long with them, only checking on them and commending their bravery before he went to his tent and dropped to his cot to sleep while he had the chance. Rob managed to sleep for a few hours, but it felt like only a few minutes had passed when he was roused by a guard to prepare for battle. He dressed himself and met with his lords at a table bearing a map of the Riverrun. Mage Mormont was there, taking the place of her wounded brother while the old bear rested and healed from his wounds. Riverrun Castle was uniquely positioned, at the confluence of the Red Fork coming from the east with the Tumblestone River branching across the north of the castle and the Red Fork continuing on south, and on the western face of the three-sided castle was a man-made ditch that stretched from the Red Fork to the Tumblestone and could be opened, letting water in and creating a three-sided moat. The Kingslayer had divided his forces into 3 separate camps to conduct the siege, which was the true beauty of the castle's design. Riverrun was not as large or as high-walled as other castles, but its unique position in the corner of the divide between the Tumblestone and the Red Fork and its shape as a three-sided castle made it impossible to encircle the castle in siege, dividing the lands surrounding it with intersecting rivers. The Blackfish's outriders had scouted the camps as best they could. Each one boxed by fences of palisades with tents inside, siege towers, rams, ladders and tread buckets under construction. On the north shore of the Tumblestone River directly above Riverrun was one camp, which was now leaderless since the Kingslayer had ridden north to hunt the Blackfish. On the western shore between the Tumblestone and the Red Fork, was a camp commanded by Lord Andros Brax which besieged Riverrun by land, separated from the castle by the moat that had been filled by the 2 rivers. Lastly, on the eastern shore of the south-running Red Fork was the final camp, headed by Sir Forley Prester and a host of freeriders who according to a captured scout were commanded by a Tiroshi sellsword. The Lannisters are using rafts to cross between the rivers to get from camp to camp. They are keeping the camps as close to the shore as they can get them, too close for Riverrun's catapults, the Blackfish explained as he pointed to the various camps on the map. How many men in each camp? Rob asked as he looked over the map. Hard to say. They circulate men across the camps frequently during the day to construct the siege equipment. Tread buckets in the north and the east camp, towers and rams in the western camp. The overall force across the camps is 12,000 footmen and somewhere between 500 and 700 riders by our count. Riverrun is your home, Sir Brynden. What would you suggest? Asked Rob, seeking his great-uncle's counsel. Sir Brynden nodded, seeming to have formulated a plan already. The Lannisters transport their men across the rivers during the day when they are working on their siege equipment, but during the night they sleep in whatever camp they are positioned at when the sun goes down and the rafts stop. The Tumblestone is a swift-running river during the day, but at night, her current has a far mightier pull. One that would easily sail their rafts down the river and put them in range of Riverrun's catapults. The Blackfish dragged his finger down the Tumblestone on the map, showing where the rafts would be swept to. And if we attack the northern camp at night, the western camp, being the closest, would send men to reinforce them by raft, Rob added, seeing his great-uncle's plan unfold in his head. Exactly. With the Kingslayer in captivity, who commands the northern camp in his absence? Asked Lord Carstark. Some captain, a lesser Westerlands knight. They expect Sir Jaime to return soon enough, so they think the camp is in no need of official leadership, only a supervisor while they build the tread buckets in the Kingslayer's absence, the Blackfish stated. We can destroy the northern camp with ease and finish off whatever reinforcements are not swept up by the Tumblestone, but that still leaves the western and eastern camps untouched, Galbart Glover pointed out. Destroying the northern camp and whatever reinforcements they send will decrease their numbers by a third at least. Then we fall back, rest and come back the next day and hit one of the other camps, suggested the Great Yon. And how do we get to the other camps? Take their rafts and use them during the day when the Tumblestone is less treacherous. We'll be crow food for their archers, Mage Mormont declared. Then we cross during the night. If we get pushed down the Tumblestone, The Riverrun catapults won't fire upon us, Theon declared. What if they can't see our banners in the night? Torren Karstark asked. We'd have to give up our horses if we want to cross with rafts on fast-running water, one of the Vale Knights added. They have Sir Ed Muir. If we return the next day, why should we not expect them to cut his throat if we try to approach? Asked Lord Mallister. Soon the camp dissolved into bickering and argument as everyone talked over one another. Robb closed his eyes and rested his hands on the table in front of the map as the yelling got louder and louder. Robb began to wonder how his father ever survived when Robb and his siblings squabbled in such a manner before him. Blackfish! Robb called in a commanding voice that brought silence to the tent. As silence and attention returned to the tent, Robb realized that he did not have anything to ask or say. Robb hesitated as his face grew hot with embarrassment and quickly searched his own mind for something to say, like rapidly flicking through the pages of a book, looking for the right one. After looking over the map once again, Robb's mind cleared. He looked at the 3 camps on the map, knowing he needed to get to each of the camps, but the very thing that kept the camps separated and vulnerable was the same thing that kept Robb from attacking them. Robb felt that by the time he came up with an idea, Tywin Lannister would have already traced back to the Trident and joined the Lannister siege at Riverrun, since he couldn't use the twins. Suddenly a realization came to Robb's mind and a plan began to take shape on the map before his eyes. Blackfish, Robb repeated in a calmer voice, breaking his lingering moment of silence. Where is the nearest crossing along the Tumblestone? The Blackfish's eyebrows knitted together as Sir Brynden pointed to a spot on the map. There's a ford, here. But it's several leagues upriver from Riverrun. It will take time to reach it and ride all the way back to the camps. Half a day I should hazard, Sir Brynden explained. Then that is what we will do. We will ride for the ford and attack the western camp, breaking the forward siege against Riverrun and freeing my uncle, Robb declared unanimously. But we have a direct path to the northern camp without any need to cross the Tumblestone, Theon pointed out. Which is why we will do that too. We will divide our forces in half. Sir Brynden, you, the Mallisters, the Knights of the Vale, the Mandaelis, the Giants and all of the remainder of the Tully host that joined us will attack the northern camp tomorrow night. When the western camp sends reinforcements to challenge you, you will ride down whoever is not claimed by the Tumblestone. Tomorrow morning I will lead the rest of our mounted forces across the ford. We will ride back down the Tumblestone and wait for the western camp to send their men away to reinforce the northern, then strike the remaining forces in the western camp. We will destroy their main siege equipment, rescue my uncle, end the siege and take out both camps in one fell swoop. The lords, knights and lordlings looked both impressed and proud at Robb as he spoke like a commander. That's all well and good, my lord, but that still leaves the 3rd camp on the eastern shore, Lord Karstark reminded Robb. A sizable chunk of the 3rd camp is made up of free riders, mercenaries paid in coin. My lord father used to tell me, you can pay a man to fight for you but you can't pay him to die for you. With the Kingslayer's force and the other 2 camps either killed or captured, their hostages freed and their siege equipment destroyed, the last camp will have no chance of maintaining the siege with half-built trebuchets facing one wall of the castle. The mercenaries will cut and run and whatever is left of the 3rd camp won't have enough men to challenge us in any regard. If they are smart they'll run, if they are stupid they'll attack, if they are scared they'll surrender. With no objections, the council dispersed and everyone returned to their tents to rest for as long as they could. The next morning, Robb's host of the army rose early before the sun crested the eastern morning sky. They quickly scarfed down whatever food they could, checked their horses, cleaned their weapons and some performed a little light sparring with their swords to prepare for their second battle. At mid-morning, after going over the battle plans with his lords and knights once again, Robb mounted his horse, fully dressed in armor, which had been cleaned from all the mud and blood from the ambush against the Kingslayer but was now decorated with cuts and scratches from battle. With the Blackfish commanding the men and giants left at the camp, Robb led his cavalry of 3,000 men from the camp westward in 2 columns galloping side by side, with Robb leading one and Jon leading the other by his side, Ghost and Grey Wind bounding alongside them. By the time they reached the ford across the Tumblestone, the sun hung in the sky above them, almost noon, which meant they were making good time. The ford was a rocky crossing with thick bubbling water flowing across, knee-deep for the horses when they trotted through the waters, splashing and swaying their way across the water to the far side of the Tumblestone. Rob and his men had hugged the coastline of the Tumblestone for the majority of their ride to the ford and had seen matching terrain across the river from them, suggesting their ride back down the Tumblestone to River Run would be as swift as their trek to the ford. With that, after conferring with Theon and Jon, Rob decided to stop at the ford and let the horses drink from the Tumblestone and also give their men time to rest and relax. Their attack on the western Lannister siege camp was conditional on the initiation of the attack on the northern camp by Sir Brynden and his men and was agreed upon to be undertaken at the hour of the wolf when the night was darkest and the camps were sleeping. Most of the horses were hitched at the trees with a few being taken down at a time to the Tumblestone to lap up water. The rest of the men lay on the grass and chatted or stretched their legs while a few on the outskirts kept watch on the off chance a Lannister scout came up the Tumblestone. Rob spotted Jon by the river sitting on a rock staring at the water, brooding solitarily as he was prone to do, but something was different now in Rob's eyes, something more serious. The White Wolf. The man who cut